Chapter 4494. Seeing Fairy Xingyu leave, Shuji shook his head slightly and said, "Alas, she's so strong." Xiao Hua's heart skipped a beat, and he said in a low voice, "Senior, why don't you say it in front of her?" Shuji put away the expression on his face and replied indifferently, "Why should I say it?" "Senior." Xiao Hua wanted to play matchmaker and said, "Actually, how can you not understand Senior Xingyu's thoughts? Sometimes, the window paper still needs us male cultivators to poke through it." Shuji looked at Xiao Hua meaningfully and said, "Do you know what I'm thinking?" "I don't know." Xiao Hua answered honestly. "Then don't say too much." Shuji said angrily, "Just take care of yourself. Among the 3 continents, you're the one with the most trouble now." He. Xiao Hua smiled and said, "Senior, don't worry. Junior knows what to do." "Well, I know that every cultivator has their secrets, and you're no exception." Shuji nodded. "I don't want to probe too much. Oh, by the way, Fairy Xingyu and I sensed some fluctuations related to the secrets of heaven in the direction of the Hall of Heroes. However, when we investigated the star-picking tower and gathered the disciples to ask, we didn't find any clues. This matter, is it related to you?" "Secrets of heaven?" Xiao Hua was slightly stunned. After thinking for a moment, he nodded and said, "Junior saw the Hall of Heroes in the Hall of Heroes and had some understanding of karma. If the secrets of heaven are related to karma, then it's related to me." Hiss. Shuji gasped and said in surprise, "The way of karma? One of the 3,000 great Taos, the way of karma? You actually know how to cultivate the way of karma?" Xiao Hua shook his head and said, "Junior doesn't know what the way of karma is. Junior just met a woman named Ju Xia on the Dawn Rain continent. She gave me 2 jade slips, one was the sun shrouding art, and the other was the heaven control technique. Junior first cultivated the sun shrouding art, then dabbled in the heaven control technique. This so-called heaven control technique might have some relationship with the karma that Senior mentioned." "Ju Xia." Shuji frowned, and a rare solemn expression appeared on his face. He transmitted a voice transmission. "Are you sure her name is Ju Xia?" Xiao Hua was startled and also nodded and said, "That's right. It's Jo Xia. This junior won't remember wrongly." Shuji thought for a moment, then raised his hand. A lightning net the size of a fist appeared in his hand. As he waved his hand, the lightning net flew out and covered the space several hundred feet around them. As the lightning net entered the space, obscure fluctuations appeared in the space. "Xiao Hua." Shuji transmitted his voice again. "Does Ju Xia have any obvious characteristics?" "There are no obvious characteristics." Seeing how serious Shuji was, Xiao Hua didn't dare to be negligent and honestly replied, "She's a beautiful woman." "Is that woman so beautiful that you can't forget her?" Shuji asked. "Even if you don't think about her, she will still appear in your mind. Or do you want to forget her, but you can't forget her?" Xiao Hua smiled bitterly and said, "Yeah. Could it be that Senior has encountered it before? I don't have the same opportunity as you." Since Shuji already knew, his face regained its calmness and he replied indifferently, "I just saw such a record in a secret record of the immortal realm." Xiao Hua was even more anxious and transmitted his voice in a low voice, "Senior, can you explain in detail?" Shuji didn't answer him. Instead, he closed his eyes and used his thumb and forefinger to pinch the space between his eyebrows, rubbing it gently. A wisp of lightning flickered between his eyebrows. Xiao Hua didn't dare to disturb him and only watched quietly. After a moment, Shuji opened his eyes and sighed. "Xiao Hua, do you know about Qingqiu Mountain?" "Qingqiu Mountain?" Xiao Hua shook his head almost without thinking. "This junior doesn't know. Then do you know about the 9-tailed fox?" Xiao Hua still shook his head. "This junior doesn't know. Qingqiu Mountain is a barren mountain in ancient times, and the 9-tailed fox clan lives on this mountain. The 9-tailed fox clan knows yin and yang and is good at transformation. They are often associated with the powerhouses who changed the world in ancient times. Moreover, every 9-tailed fox is a rare beauty in the eyes of humans, and also a rare demon in the eyes of demons. Let's put it this way. The 9-tailed fox is a demon condensed from the most beautiful yin in the world. It is a fatal temptation to every existence with yang aura. However, they don't seem to reveal their true appearance to any human or demon, and would only take out their illusory appearance unless they decide to follow that person or demon for life. Of course, no one can tell whether it's an illusory appearance or their true appearance, which is why no one knows how beautiful they are. Although Shuji was transmitting his voice was still very low, and he continued, "It's said that the nine-tailed fox clan has always started their name with Ju. If I'm not mistaken, the Juxia you met is a descendant of the nine-tailed fox of Qingqiu Mountain." Seeing Shuji so solemn, Xiao Hua asked curiously, "This Juxia said she's not from the Dawn Rain continent, but this junior doesn't know where she's from either. Could she really be from Qingqiu Mountain? That's absolutely impossible." Shuji shook his head. The nine-tailed fox of Qingqiu Mountain would never come to the present realm. She could only be a descendant whose bloodline had wandered to the lower realm. Also, could there be some taboo in Qingqiu Mountain? Xiao Hua asked again. Shuji nodded. That's right. If it weren't for the 3 continents, this Shu wouldn't have dared to say the 3 words Qingqiu Mountain. Why? Xiao Hua asked curiously. Don't ask why, this Shu doesn't know either. Shuji replied. This Shu is merely a punisher of the Punisher Palace. Hiss. Xiao Hua was stunned and stared at Shuji. Then why are you telling this junior all this, senior? Sigh. Shuji sighed in a rare instance and looked up towards the distance, his gaze seemingly piercing through time and space as he said, because this Shu had received guidance from the nine-tailed fox before ascending to immortality. Later, after ascending to immortality, I obtained somewhere in the immortal realm the legacy of the Qingqiu Mountain lineage that had fallen to the immortal realm. Although this Shu's divination technique is evolved from thunderbolts, its foundation is still the legacy of the Qingqiu Mountain. Xiao Hua smiled bitterly. You seem to be saying too much, senior. You don't have to tell this junior all this. No. Shuji shook his head. This Shu had long predicted that you were fated to meet this Shu. Previously, this Shu only thought that you were related to the Xingyue Palace, but I didn't expect that you were actually related to the nine-tailed fox. Think about it, that Juxia. How did you get to know her? Boom. When Xiao Hua heard this, it was as if he was suddenly enlightened. His body shook as if he had been struck by lightning. He looked at Shuji with a dumbstruck expression and muttered, Juxia said that what she wanted this junior to do was too difficult. It would take 10,000 years or even 100,000 years to accomplish it. Therefore, she did not tell this junior what she wanted this junior to do. She is indeed a cunning nine-tailed fox. She is indeed a nine-tailed fox who knows yin and yang. Shuji sighed. If she hadn't been able to predict that you would meet this Shu in the 3 continents, you would have to cultivate for 100,000 years before you could ascend to the immortal realm and meet this Shu. Xiao Hua was confused again and smiled bitterly. Could it be that finding senior is what Juxia wants this junior to do? To be precise, it's to find the inheritance that Qingqiu Mountain left in the immortal realm, not to find this Shu. As Shuji spoke, he tapped between his eyebrows, and the lightning mark between his eyebrows flashed again. When a thumb-sized lightning ball appeared, Shuji instructed, Xiao Hua, use vigorous thunderbolt to collect this lightning ball. Be careful, don't expose the thing inside the lightning ball. Yes. Seeing that Shuji was so serious, Xiao Hua hurriedly tapped between his eyebrows. Several thick lightning threads appeared and landed on the lightning ball, waiting for it to fall between Xiao Hua's eyebrows. Shuji let out a long sigh and ordered again, remember, this matter and this item must not be known to anyone. Otherwise, your life will be in danger. Even this Shu won't be able to survive. Millimeter. Xiao Hua nodded. This junior is the best at this kind of thing. That's good. Shuji gave a rare smile. This item is Qingqiu Mountain's inheritance. You should be able to comprehend it when you're cultivating Fury of Thunder. Oh, right, your so-called mastery of heaven and earth must be related to this inheritance. You should be able to comprehend it when the conditions are right. If that's the case, then Juxia must be related to this item. This junior can then pass this item to Juxia with peace of mind? Xiao Hua asked doubtfully. It should be. Shuji shrugged, as if he had put down a heavy burden and replied. Senior, are you sure? Xiao Hua asked. Shuji nodded. Of course. When you come out of Xingyue Palace, you'll understand why I said so. Yes. This junior understands. Xiao Hua nodded. If this is Zhu Xia's, this junior will definitely. At this point, Xiao Hua said happily, if that's the case, then this junior will definitely return to Dawn Rain Continent. This? I don't know. Shuji shook his head. Didn't Zhu Xia say that it might be 100,000 years? Maybe she'll go to the immortal realm to look for you. Then, Shuji reminded him again, of course, the matters of Dawn Rain Continent seem to be somewhat secretive. However, since Xingyue didn't say anything, I'm afraid she has some taboos. Don't make things too difficult for her. As he spoke, Shuji raised his eyebrows and opened his mouth. A thunderbolt struck the air. The thunder net that had previously been hidden in the void revealed itself and entered Shuji's mouth along with the thunderbolt. In just a few breaths, Fairy Xingyue returned with a murderous look on her face. How was it? Shuji asked. Did you find it? I don't dare to say anything about the 3 continents, but within Xingyue, there's nothing I can't do. Fairy Xingyue replied with a cold snort. Xiao Hua smiled and asked, in that case, other than Zhaixing Lu, it also involves the hidden immortal continent. Fairy Xingyue glared at Xiao Hua and said fiercely, it's only been a few days. Why are you becoming more and more like Shuji? Can't you say something nice? Chapter 4495. Hearing this, Xiao Hua looked at Fairy Xingyue innocently, touched his nose, and said, I'm not like Senior Shu, but like Senior Shu, I like to seek truth from fact. Seek truth from fact. You have the nerve to say that. You touched your nose again. Fairy Xingyue replied. You guessed right. I removed a few star-picking towers in the 1,000 Demons Sacred Realm, but 2 tower masters were not satisfied. They wanted to take advantage of me entering the Star Moon Palace to collude with a Confucian family to seize the Star Moon Palace. Unfortunately, although I found the 2 tower masters and even found out about the Confucian cultivators who sneaked into the star-picking tower, I couldn't find out which Confucian family was behind them. I searched the soul of one of the tower masters and his primordial spirit exploded. Then, I used the secret technique of the Palm Palace. That Confucian cultivator's primordial spirit didn't explode, but I couldn't find anything. It's really strange. Shuji said indifferently, don't worry. You have a lot of time before the Star Moon Palace appears, but then, Shuji suddenly raised his head and looked to the east. He whispered, I'm afraid, you don't have time. Sure enough, Fairy Xingyue also looked in that direction and smiled bitterly. You're right. Xiao Hua released his divine consciousness in surprise. Unfortunately, he didn't find anything. After a few breaths, Shuji and Fairy Xingyue looked solemn. Fairy Xingyue said to Shuji, think about it carefully. What are we not prepared for? I'll get them to activate the star-picking tower now. Okay. Shuji nodded. After Fairy Xingyue left, he pointed to a quiet room and said to Xiao Hua, that's a quiet room. You can meditate there. When we get to the Qidi River, I'll call you out. At that time, I'll need to borrow your magic power. Yes, I understand. Xiao Hua nodded, got up, and entered the quiet room. The quiet room was not big, only about 100 feet in size. It was very different from the usual luxurious style of the star-picking tower. When Xiao Hua saw the praying mat in the middle of the quiet room, his heart warmed again. Needless to say, Shuji must have used this room for his own quiet cultivation when he came to Zhaixing Lu. Now, Shuji had given this quiet room to Xiao Hua to use. Of course, there were many quiet rooms that could be used in Zhaixing Lu, but Shuji had taken out the quiet room that he was used to. It was clear that he saw Xiao Hua as his junior. Xiao Hua sat down cross-legged and pondered for a moment. Then, he waved his hand and sent out a jade talisman, setting up the capital star formation. After scanning with his divine sense and confirming that there were no flaws, Xiao Hua sat down with peace of mind, raised his thumb, and placed it on his forehead. Thunder flashed and the ball of lightning Shuji gave Xiao Hua flew out again. However, at this moment, the ball of lightning had just appeared and it immediately emitted a faint fluctuation. The fluctuation had only just appeared when Xiao Hua's mind swept the ball of lightning into the space in an instant. The ripples then charged towards the capital star array. Whoosh! The fluctuations weakened, but when they collided with the capital star formation, the space several meters to the left of Xiaohua trembled. Xiaohua narrowed his eyes and raised his right hand, using the thunder palm. At that moment, the lightning palm was different from the lightning palms displayed by ordinary cultivators. It was formed from the 5 Qi righteous lightning, 9 firmaments divine lightning, 3 corpses yin lightning and nether demonic lightning. When the lightning descended, the fluctuations were instantly eliminated, leaving not a trace behind. Soon after, Xiaohua closed his eyes in satisfaction. His eyes focused on his nose, and his nose focused on his heart as he began to meditate. Xiaohua's mind fell into the space and immediately turned into Jade Archive Xiaohua. The ball of lightning that had been swept into the space by his mind earlier quietly floated there. Although the threads of lightning were constantly flashing, they didn't make any sound. The light and shadow emitted by the threads of lightning were also extremely strange and constantly changing. Even Jade Archive Xiaohua was dumbfounded when he saw this. Looking at the space around the light and shadow, although there wasn't any force, the threads of lightning were still forced out of the cracks. Ripples of the same cryptic fluctuations spread out in all directions. Jade Archive Xiaohua raised his hand and pointed. With a tearing sound, it was as if silk was being torn apart. Under the threads of lightning, layers of lightning bolts rushed out like dragons and crazily collided with Jade Archive Xiaohua's finger. Jade Archive Xiaohua frowned and made a grabbing motion with his right hand. Buzz! Tens of thousands of layers of crystal-like light shields instantly appeared and trembled as they imprisoned the space several meters around the threads of lightning. Boom! 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 The threads of lightning were also powerful. They crazily attacked the restriction and broke through layer after layer. In the blink of an eye, tens of thousands of layers of restrictions were like blooming flower bud. This is the restriction set up by Shu Ji. Feeling the familiar fury of lightning within the threads of lightning, Jade Archive Xiaohua pondered. However, this restriction seems to be targeted at the inheritance item inside. When I forcibly broke the restriction, it triggered the restriction. While Xiaohua was thinking, Jade Archive Xiaohua's right hand made a grabbing motion. Hum hum hum. With several explosions, tens of thousands of light barriers appeared once again. When the horned dragon-like lightning threads disappeared, 90% of the light barriers had been penetrated. Boom! The threads of lightning disappeared and the lightning ball also turned invisible. At the same time, a 9-colored beam of light let out a loud roar and rushed high into the sky. The 9-colored beam of light was so gorgeous that it reflected on Jade Archive Xiaohua's face and made it look sparkling and translucent. Inside the beam of light, a palm-sized 9-tailed fox sculpture appeared. When Jade Archive Xiaohua's gaze landed on this sculpture, he immediately felt that everything in front of him was multicolored, and a kaleidoscopic world was born near Jade Archive Xiaohua. Jade Archive Xiaohua was startled and hurriedly closed his eyes. However, the rotating multicolored world was like a flower floating in his mind, and it made him feel like he was sinking deeper and deeper. Damn it! Jade Archive Xiaohua cursed and quickly retreated. Thunder appeared between his eyebrows. Sure enough, the thunder struck and shattered the multicolored world. In front of Jade Archive Xiaohua's eyes was another pillar of light that soared into the sky. Jade Archive Xiaohua narrowed his eyes and his eyebrows turned into lightning. Through this lightning, Jade Archive Xiaohua was able to see the colorful fox sculpture clearly. However, Jade Archive Xiaohua only glanced at the colorful fox sculpture and immediately frowned and looked up at the pillar of light that pierced the sky. The pillar of light was still rushing up and there was no sign of it stopping. Damn it, this inheritance item of Qingqiu Mountain is too strange. No wonder Senior Shu warned I. Jade Archive Xiaohua sighed and stretched out his hands. His left hand reached down and his right hand reached up and pressed down. Jade Archive Xiaohua's hands suddenly crossed space and landed on the two ends of the pillar of light that was madly rushing out. Then Jade Archive Xiaohua put his hands together again. Boom boom boom. Like the sound of the pillar of air exploding, the huge pillar of light was actually pressed into the 9-tailed colorful fox sculpture by Jade Archive Xiaohua. Then, Jade Archive Xiaohua did not wait for the nine-tailed colorful fox sculpture to make any more movements. He grabbed with one hand and a layer of restriction fell on the painted sculpture. The painted sculpture then returned to its calm state. The Jade Archive Xiaohua frowned slightly and looked at the painted sculpture. He saw that the endless waves of light appeared again. The waves of light rippled like fine lines, and the nine-tailed fox in the painted sculpture disappeared in an instant. A strange and clever squirrel was revealed. Before Jade Archive Xiaohua could see clearly, another wave of light emerged under the fine lines and another ferocious and strange demonic beast was transformed. Oh! Jade Archive Xiaohua was surprised. In a few breaths of time, the colorful fox had changed into no less than a dozen different appearances. Along with Jade Archive Xiaohua's surprise, the beautiful appearance of Juxia changed. That smile yet not smile, that angry yet not angry voice was like the first time Xiaohua saw it. It's really powerful. Jade Archive Xiaohua nodded. Juxia's appearance disappeared and a nine-tailed fox's original appearance was born. The nine-tailed fox's 9 tails each had a different color, and there were endless threads of light in each tail. Each thread of light contained a lot of brilliance, just like a world of brilliance. Looking at the nine-tailed fox's body, there were even more brilliant spots of light like the stars in the starry sky. Not only did they emit brilliance, but they were also endlessly rotating. It seemed that each spot of light had its own trajectory, and each trajectory revealed a kind of mystery. The nine-tailed fox's original appearance was only revealed in a split second. If Jade Archive Xiaohua was not in his space, he would definitely not be able to see it. Then, countless illusions were born on the nine-tailed fox's painted sculpture, and the nine-tailed fox's original appearance could no longer be seen. Jade Archive Xiaohua closed his eyes and thought for a moment. Rumble. The karmic hand hidden in the void within the space appeared. The big hand grabbed, and the nine-tailed fox's painted sculpture flew out of thin air and slowly fell into the big hand. The painted sculpture just touched the karmic hand, and the endless spots of light contained in the painted sculpture immediately flew out like butterflies and landed in various parts of the big hand. Swish, swish, swish. Strange fluctuations rushed out from various parts of the karmic hand. These fluctuations intertwined with each other, and pieces of light and shadow drifted down like fragments where the fluctuations intertwined. And within these lights and shadows, there were pieces of small worlds hidden within them. Slowly, the nine-tailed fox's painted sculpture merged into the karmic hand, and the space near the karmic hand trembled. In the trembling, it was as if there was an invisible chisel, chiseling out the unclear lines on the karmic hand one by one. Ha ha! Jade Archive Xiaohua watched as the karmic hand became clearer and clearer, and couldn't help but laugh. Juxia really is of the Qingqiu lineage. The records in this legacy item are of the same origin as the mastery of heaven and earth. Along with his laughter, Jade Archive Xiaohua's figure began to change. Just like the nine-tailed fox's light and shadow, he had already changed into dozens of images in the span of a few breaths. Only after half a cup of tea's worth of time did Jade Archive Xiaohua's figure appear. He looked at his hands with great satisfaction and laughed. I previously thought that my transformation technique was pretty good, but compared to the Qingqiu lineage transformation technique, it's like the difference between heaven and earth. The Qingqiu lineage's so-called understanding of yin and yang and being adept at transformation really isn't a bluff. Let the karmic hand comprehend the yin and yang technique. I will learn this transformation technique, and in the future, I'll be able to deceive the 3 continent. Chapter 4496. With that thought in mind, Jade Archive Xiaohua emerged from the space and focused his mind on his physical body. His hands did not seem to make any hand seals as his physical body began to slowly transform. First, it was various forms of humans, then beasts, and finally, plants and flowers. It was incredibly lifelike. At the same time that Xiaohua was cultivating the Qingqiu sect's secret art, the dozens of pavilions outside the star-plucking tower were now spinning faster. The flames and colorful lotuses that were the silhouettes of light before were now clouds, while the star-plucking tower that was shaped like a pagoda was now slowly becoming oval. As the clouds fell into the sky, pillars of noble qi crashed down. As the pavilions spun, rays of starlight swayed and appeared. The light screen of stars and moon also gradually rose from the pillars of noble chi. Rumble. When the space hundreds of miles around the star-plucking tower was filled with clouds and starlight, the entire ground began to shake. Amidst the rumbling, the star-plucking tower was uprooted out of thin air. Beneath the ground, the star-plucking tower's foundation broke through the ground. Rocks tumbled and mountain ridges collapsed. A 1,000-mile-long ship flew out from the ground. Lightning arcs flashed around it as it rose into the air. The ship looked similar to the Thunder ship, but in reality, there was a huge difference. The star-plucking tower in the center of the ship alone was something the Thunder ship did not have. Moreover, the lightning arcs around the ship looked powerful, but in reality, they were still relying on the power of the clouds, stars, and moon. They were far less powerful than the Thunder ship. The flying ship first soared into the sky. Countless great chi pillars in the void crashed into the defensive array outside the ship. Auspicious clouds floated out from the defensive array. Woo-woo. Amidst the whistling of the wind, the flying ship began to slowly fly towards the rising sun. Xiao Hua hid in the quiet room to cultivate. In the beginning, his physical body still had some shape and could transform into all things in the world. However, in the end, his body no longer looked like a body, nor did it have a fixed shape. It turned into a stream of light and also turned into floating clouds. Spots of light were finally born in the capital star array, as if stars were flashing in the sky. In front of Xiao Hua's eyes, the colorful world that he saw when he used the lightning escape to its limit was faintly born again. Xiao Hua did not dare to slack off, nor did he dare to further comprehend that level. He merely maintained his original state, carefully comprehending and observing the state of his physical body. The secret arts of Qingqiu flowed in his mind like a clear spring. After an unknown amount of time, the light spots in the entire space flickered and instantly gathered together. Xiao Hua's silhouette was revealed. At the same time, thousands of phantoms emerged from the silhouette like a peacock spreading its tail. When the phantoms were annihilated, Xiao Hua's smiling figure quietly stood in mid-air. At this moment, Xiao Hua seemed to be standing in the air, yet also seemed to be drawn into the void. His body seemed to be in the light, yet also seemed to be in the darkness. Between the light and the darkness, strands of twisted light rapidly flowed out of Xiao Hua's body. The distorted Xiao Hua seemed to be both real and illusory at the same time. He was stepping on the boundary between real and illusory. So that's how it is. A smile appeared at the corner of Xiao Hua's lips. It had more charm than before, but the compassion in his black and white eyes did not change at all. Xiao Hua mused to himself. So-called transformations are nothing more than the combination of light and physical body. The inferior would use the physical body to drive light and shadow, the mediocre would use light and shadow to power the physical body, while the superior would fuse light and shadow together with the physical body. It's a pity. Even if the Qingqiu lineage knows that yin and yang are adept at transformations, they would never know that there is a light escape technique in this world, one that allows one to hide in light as an escape technique. Light and shadow would fuse with the physical body at a superficial level, and the physical body would fuse with light and shadow at a profound level. In the end, the art of yin and yang is the true foundation of the Qingqiu lineage, while transformations are but a minor detail. And yet, I was able to comprehend the surface of it in such a short period of time. Senior Shu, the immortal realm's enforcer of punishments, had not gained much from the legacy of Qingqiu Mountain for so long. Aside from the fact that Senior Shu had never practiced the art of heaven and earth manipulation before, it is also because Senior Shu does not possess a demon form and could not grasp the mysteries of the diamond's cultivation of the power of stars and moon. More importantly, Senior Shu has never refined the rainbow bone, which means he could not comprehend the mysteries of light and physical body. Xiao Hua's brow lifted at the thought, an indescribable elegance appearing between his brows. He floated up from the praying mat, raised a hand and grasped. His hand instantly turned into a sheet of light and shadow, and the hundreds of jade talismans that had been laid out in a formation fell into his hand like swallows returning to their nest. Just as he put away the jade talismans, a faint voice wafted from outside the sanctuary. Xiao Hua, this junior is here. Xiao Hua hurriedly replied. Is something the matter, Senior Shu? The Chidi River is up ahead. If you don't have anything urgent to cultivate, come out of seclusion first. Shuji did not use his divine ability, but only transmitted his voice softly from outside. Xiao Hua flew to the door of the sanctuary, urged his body to pass through the pavilion, and appeared in front of Shuji. He smiled and said, "This junior has already finished his meditation and was waiting for senior to summon me." Oh! Shuji's gaze swept over Xiao Hua, and he could not help but be surprised. Behind him, Fairy Xingyu also said curiously, "Xiao Hua, you seem to have changed into a different person." Xiao Hua touched his nose and said with a wry smile, "Seniors, what do you mean? I've only been cultivating in seclusion for dozens of days. Why do I seem to have changed into a different person? The ancients have said that a scholar who has been away for 3 days should be looked at with new eyes." Fairy Xingyu looked up and down at Xiao Hua again, pursed her lips, and said with a smile, "This sentence is especially suitable for you. Previously, you were like a Xiao Hua. Although you were budding, you were abnormally shy and had a bit of a dusty aura. But now, this Xiao Hua has bloomed. Not only is its fragrance assailing the nose, but it is also glorious. Even if light dust falls on it, it will produce a luster. Not to mention other things, just this little habit of yours of wiping your nose. It looked a little funny before, but now, it has a kind of cute and attractive charm. Even I can't help but feel a sense of familiarity." "Elder sister," Xiao Hua said with a wry smile, "can you not be so mushy? Why does it sound like there's a lot of cosmetics?" "Xingyue is right," Shuji said meaningfully, "you have indeed made me look at you in a new light. Senior, you flatter me." Xiao Hua understood tacitly and bowed. "This is all thanks to senior's kindness. This junior dares not forget it." Shuji helped Xiao Hua up and said, "Opportunities are opportunities. This is the will of the heavens. What are the two of you doing behind my back again?" Fairy Xingyu asked. When she saw the two of them acting like this, she immediately understood something. "If you give Xingyue to Xiao Hua, I will consider telling you." Shuji turned to look at Fairy Xingyu and said calmly. When Xiao Hua heard this, he smiled wryly in his heart and thought, "Senior Xiao, are you trying to help me or set a trap for me?" Xiao Hua naturally wanted Xingyue, but Fairy Xingyu clearly had her own plans and had no intention of handing it over to him. When Xiao Hua encountered the betrayal of the two Zhai Xing Lu, he did not express his intentions. He only asked Fairy Xingyu to investigate it herself. He had already made his attitude clear in advance. Zhai Xing Lu had nothing to do with him. Since Fairy Xingyu saw that there were some problems with Zhai Xing Lu, she must be able to predict that Zhai Xing Lu would be in chaos in the future. Given this, Fairy Xingyu might have the intention of entrusting Xiao Hua to him. Now that Shuji had said this, even if Fairy Xingyu had such thoughts, they would definitely be dispelled by Shuji's words. Sure enough, Fairy Xingyu smiled coldly and said, "It's up to you whether you want to say it or not. The matter between two men has nothing to do with me. I just taught a few more secret techniques of the immortal world. Who doesn't know how to do it? Teach me if you have the ability," Shuji retorted sarcastically, as if he was looking for trouble. Fairy Xingyu was slightly taken aback. However, after a moment, she smiled and said, "Of course I know how to. However, that will have to wait until he reaches the immortal world. Let's go." Shuji glanced at Fairy Xingyu, knowing that she was warning him. However, he did not take it seriously and said, "The Star Moon Palace is already close at hand. Aren't you anxious at all?" "Phew." Fairy Xingyu straightened up and stretched. Her slender body was not much different from Shuji's. Then, Fairy Xingyu yawned and said lazily, "I was naturally excited the first few times. However, I'm used to disappointment now. Even though I've made so many preparations for the appearance of the Star Moon Palace, I don't dare have any more extravagant hopes when I think about the possibility of failure." Shuji frowned and said, "Didn't I tell you? With Xiao Hua's help this time, there won't be too much of a problem." "Your divination technique?" Fairy Xingyu smiled slightly and asked in return, "If there was a well-tested divination technique in this world, would you still be banished to the 3 continents? If your divination technique was really useful, would you still need to explore the Star Moon Palace for the 9th time? In this world, There are many fickle people. There are many feelings of loss and loneliness. Change is the essence of the heavenly way. You and I are just ordinary immortals. We can't take a peek at the heart of the heavenly way. Needless to say, Shuji could already sense the deep sense of loss in Fairy Xingyu's tone. Xiao Hua also understood that Fairy Xingyu's heart had been hurt by the two traitorous stargazing tower masters. Thus, she had doubts about the entire Star Moon expedition. Shuji opened his mouth, wanting to say something. However, when the words reached his mouth, he swallowed them back down. This was because Fairy Xingyu also knew what she should say. Xiao Hua did not need to say more. However, Xiao Hua might not know what Fairy Xingyu wanted to hear. Therefore, Xiao Hua glanced at Shuji and said to Fairy Xingyu with a smile, "Fairy, what are you saying?" In the eyes of the tens of thousands of humans and demons who entered the Star Moon Palace, you are the heavenly way. They racked their brains to enter the Star Moon Palace and find their own opportunities inside. However, how could they know? You were the one who found the Star Moon Palace. The most fundamental mystery of the Star Moon Palace is the passageway to the immortal world. Humph, of course. Women were the most fickle. Xiao Hua's strong flattery made Fairy Xingyu's face instantly look better. She rolled her eyes at Shuji and said, "Can't you say something nice? P.S. I'm glad to hear that Bai Zhibao and Li Tong got married yesterday. I wish the golden couple 100 years of happiness and a long life together." Chapter 4497. Ha ha. Without waiting for Shuji to speak, Xiao Hua immediately laughed and said, "Senior Shu, I'll tell you more when we reach the immortal realm. There are too many people now, so it might be inconvenient to talk about some things." Fairy, quickly open Zhai Xinglu. Fairy Xingyu glanced at Shuji angrily. When she saw the coldness in Shuji's eyes, her heart trembled. Just as Xiao Hua had speculated, the Punisher Celestial Lord and the Disciplined Celestial Lord were not on good terms, and the Punishment Palace and the Discipline Palace were like fire and water. It was fine if Fairy Xingyu and Shuji were in the three continents, but if they returned to the immortal realm, how could they be so free? Although they had not yet returned to the immortal realm, Shuji had already begun to be on guard, and Fairy Xingyu had a premonition of the estrangement between the two of them in the immortal realm. Alas, even if they are immortals, so what? Fairy Xingyu sighed secretly. With a wave of her sleeve, a cluster of starlight flew out from her hand and rushed to the top of the palace. When the brilliance of the top of the palace appeared, a clear and cloudless blue sky appeared in front of Xiao Hua. Shuji glanced at Fairy Xingyu and said to Xiao Hua, "Let's go. This is the Qidi River. The signs of the Star Moon Palace's appearance are obvious. It will appear at any time." "Okay." Xiao Hua nodded and followed Shuji out of Zhai Xinglu. At this time, Zhai Xinglu stopped on a mountain range. On one side of the mountain range, the disciples of the 100 schools of thought had begun to leave Zhai Xinglu one after another. The disciples of Zhai Xinglu, as well as the cultivators who had been selected to follow Zhai Xinglu into the Star Moon Palace, flew to the other side of the mountain range. Xiao Hua had just looked around when suddenly, an indescribable wind whistled in the distance. Xiao Hua hurriedly turned his head. In the east, a majestic river seemed to have come from the sky. It rushed across the ground and fell to the end of the sky. The river seemed to be endless and also seemed to be bottomless. The orange river sparkled under the sun. If there was more orange, it would be similar to the Blood River. If there was less orange, it would not be as brilliant as it was now. This was the Qidi River. The sparkling scarlet color covered the surface of the river like tiny swimming fish. Wisps of water vapor rushed into the air and emitted a scarlet glow. Although this scarlet glow was very thin, its brilliance was not inferior to the surface of the river. Where the wind blew, the brilliance swayed, and different illusions surged out. Occasionally, some clouds would surge and turn into colored glass, precious pearls, ingots, pearls, and other shapes, making them even more dazzling. Although the scenery of heaven and earth was vivid, after looking at it for a while, Xiao Hua felt somewhat bewildered. This was because above the surface of the river, the sound of the wind could be heard. Huge gusts of wind whistled past, as if there were many wind tunnels. The strange sounds were even more soul-stirring than the wails of ghosts and howls of wolves. However, in this violent wind, the surface of the river was picturesque, and the waves were like flowers. It was no different from the usual calm and tranquil waves. What was special was that under those thin ripples, the river water did not have any impurities. It was incomparably clear and bright like a crystal. At a glance, one could see more than a dozen feet. Under the surface of the water, perhaps there were some swaying aquatic plants, perhaps there were some floating algae, but no matter if it was fish, shrimp, or river worms, there were no traces of them. Xiao Hua was just about to release his divine sense to investigate, when boom! The sound of an explosion resounded from several thousand li away in the sky. Immediately, 10,000 waves surged violently like a tide, hiding the sky and covering the earth as they smashed down, covering an area of 10,000 li. Under the waves, an indescribable distortion appeared in the sky of 10,000 li. This distortion was like tens of millions of tiny vortexes. Not only did the nearby airflow mutate, crisscrossing and attacking, even the splashing sunlight flashed with light. The entire space of 10,000 li was filled with these waves, as if an enormous bubble was rapidly spreading in all directions. The ripples soared high into the sky, and clouds were torn apart one after another. Many fine spatial cracks could be faintly seen. The ripples crashed into the river surface, and many ditches that were several feet long were torn open. The ripples blew across the ground, and sand and pebbles were sent flying. Thousands of spider-web-like cracks appeared on the ground. However, the surface of the river still did not show any waves. The sand and stones on the ground rushed up several feet and then fell back down. It was as if a large hand was firmly pressing down on the space of several thousand li. Xiao Hua's gaze fell on the waves of space. Similar to the nine-tailed fox painted sculpture, layers upon layers of light entered Xiao Hua's mind. Tens of thousands of balls of light attracted Xiao Hua's gaze. Although Xiao Hua tried his best to avoid his gaze falling on these balls of light, in a flash, a spot of light had already appeared in front of him out of thin air. Boom! The moment Xiao Hua's gaze fell, a primitive catalogue crashed into Xiao Hua's mind. This prehistoric catalogue was a little different from what Xiao Hua had seen before. Although the mountains were extremely tall and the water was extremely deep, the mountains were collapsing and the water was pouring down. Amidst the rumbling of the mountains and rivers, there were many incomparably huge figures crazily fighting. These figures held lightning in their hands and spat out stars from their mouths. With a single punch, the sky would collapse. As their gazes wandered, the stars would explode. All kinds of indescribable wills and unparalleled power swept through the entire primitive world. These wills were extremely provocative and tyrannical. Even the incomparably huge primitive world could not withstand these wills. Xiao Hua was already at the grand ascension stage of the human race, and he had also experienced the ruins and the primordial continent in the past, but as soon as his spiritual sense came into contact with these consciousnesses, he was struck by a sense of inferiority, and a sense of acute pain welled up in his mind. Xiao Hua did not dare to be negligent. He hurriedly withdrew his gaze and his scattered divine consciousness from the balls of light. However, in the space within 10,000 miles, a remnant red color had already appeared. The moment Xiao Hua's gaze fell, the sky gradually darkened. The setting sun, which was supposed to be setting in the west, shone listlessly in this space. Pieces of broken spiritual consciousness, rays of light that had been stripped away, and strands of remnant spiritual consciousness wandered helplessly in the blood-red color. Woo! Just as Xiao Hua was about to sigh, a wave that could destroy the heavens and the earth was born in the center of the space. A hurricane suddenly rose with the wave, and thousands of miles of space were torn apart. Wave after wave of collapse spread in all directions. In just an instant, the 10,000 miles of space that was previously covered completely disappeared. The balls of light were void, and the waves were void. Even Xiao Hua's divine consciousness, which had fallen into the space, was not spared. The collapse of the space was very strange. It was only within 10,000 miles of space, and outside of the wave, it was not affected at all. Furthermore, after the collapse, countless primordial chi of heaven and earth rushed in from other places, and the entire space gradually returned to its original state. Seeing this, Xiao Hua could not help but be dumbfounded. He thought to himself, oh my, what's the origin of this star-moon palace? How is it related to the eldritch world? However, it was only a moment before he came to a realization. Nonsense, if there's no origin, how can there be an opportunity to enter the immortal world inside? How can two immortals, Shuji and Fairy Xingyu, spend so much effort to enter? However, the star-moon palace has yet to appear. Just this premonition should be enough to extinguish the ambitions of many cultivators, right? Thinking of this, Xiao Hua looked around again. Indeed, the spaceship that Zhai Xinglu had restored had already descended from the sky and stopped steadily between the mountains. There were many Zhai Xinglu disciples sitting cross-legged on the spaceship. Every one of them was meditating, and wisps of noble qi and primordial qi of heaven and earth were entering the spaceship through the void. On the mountains around the spaceship, the 100 schools of thought had already dispersed. Many Confucian cultivators were lying on the ground dispiritedly. Some had blood at the corners of their mouths, some had blood seeping out of their 7 orifices, and some even had holes in their heads. Xiao Hua was only at a corner of the Qidi River. When he looked at the other places, he saw many great demons with 7th-grade primordial qi scattered all over the place. Xiao Hua's gaze swept across, and there were tens of thousands of them. Unlike humans, the great demons were mostly alone and did not have any followers. Moreover, among the tens of thousands of great demons, nearly 10% of them were lying on the ground, and they all looked seriously injured. There were even close to 100 great demons whose bodies had already collapsed, and it seemed that they would not survive. Not far from where the great demons were, there were some Buddhist disciples. There were not many of them, only about 1,000 of them. However, these Buddhas did not have the usual kind looks. Instead, they were all glaring angrily, and it was obvious that they were Buddhist guardians. On the other side of Zhai Xinglu, the situation was different from that of the demon race. Although it was already dusk, there was a brilliant brilliance in this space. Layers of auspicious clouds spread out in the sky like a barrier. Pillars of awe-inspiring qi, driven by the inscriptions on the armor, danced like horned dragons. Images of men plowing and women weaving, scholars reading at night, and generals fighting on the battlefield appeared on the inscriptions on the armor. Above these images, there were 4 huge flower-shaped flying boats that emitted a low rumble, and a majestic, awe-inspiring aura spread out in all directions. This aura carried enlightenment, subservience, majesty, and also self-admiration. Oh! Just as Xiao Hua was about to take a closer look at the 4 flower-shaped flying boats, a slightly puzzled voice sounded in his ears. Why aren't you reacting? Xiao Hua turned his head and looked at Fairy Xingyu, who was standing not far away and looking at him. He smiled and said, what kind of reaction does this junior need in order to express his admiration for the Star Moon Palace? Is it subservience to the aura in the premonition? No, no. Fairy Xingyu was obviously not attracted by Xiao Hua's deliberately awkward choice of words. Instead, she shook her head and said, you definitely have some secrets that you have not mentioned. The premonition of the Star Moon Palace is extraordinary. Even when Shuji and I saw it for the first time back then, we could not help but be deeply affected by it and almost suffered from it. However, you are completely fine. It even gives me a feeling that this is a common occurrence. Oh! If even the 2 seniors are deeply affected by it, what about the other disciples? Xiao Hua was shocked and hurriedly looked at the flying boat that Zhai Xinglu had transformed into. They are fine. Shuji's voice sounded. Because the premonition is too powerful, I have already placed a restriction outside the flying boat. The disciples of Zhai Xinglu cannot see these premonitions. After a while, I will open the restriction and let them get used to the aura of the Star Moon Palace. That's good. Xiao Hua looked at the strange flying boat and said with a smile, Senior, the style of this flying boat doesn't look very good. Chapter 4498. That's right. You have good taste. Fairy Xingyu was a little surprised by Xiao Hua's reaction. Xiao Hua wanted to distract her, but he couldn't. However, when Xiao Hua mentioned the style of the spaceship, her attention was immediately attracted. She pursed her lips and said with a smile, when I built this spaceship, I didn't like this style. But Shuji said that this was the style of his hometown spaceship. He liked it, so I had to give in to him. Xiao Hua, you really have good eyes. You can tell at a glance that this spaceship is not good looking. That's right. Xiao Hua pointed to the huge deck and the cabin on the deck and said with a smile, this style is too square. It's actually not suitable for the spaceship to fly. Junior's two Thunderboats are not as big as Senior's spaceship, but in terms of flying speed, I'm afraid that Senior's spaceship can't compare. Your Thunderboat borrowed the essence of the Thunder Vanquishing Bead and used the Thunder Pool as its driving force. It doesn't need any primordial stones or arrays as its foundation, so its speed is naturally fast. Shuji glanced at Xiao Hua and said, Punisher Heavenly Lord has such a flying boat. How can I compare to Punisher Heavenly Lord? Oh. Xiao Hua patted his forehead and pretended to be surprised. What a pity. What's wrong? Fairy Xingyu was surprised and asked, did you forget something? No. Xiao Hua said in all seriousness, Junior missed the opportunity to flatter the two seniors. The two Thunderboats are exactly one for each of us. Do you really have this intention? Shuji raised his eyebrows and asked. Xiao Hua was originally joking. However, after hearing Shuji's words, he pondered for a moment and immediately understood the meaning behind his words. Without any hesitation, Xiao Hua took out two blank jade eyes from his bosom and placed them on his forehead. After a moment, he respectfully handed the two jade eyes to the two and said, I presume that the two seniors don't care about the construction method of the Thunderboat. This is the construction method of the Thunder Pool, and also the result of Junior's comprehension of the Thunder Vanquishing Bead. I hope the two seniors don't mind. Fairy Xingyu smiled slightly, took the jade eyes, and said, at least you have a conscience. I've already given you so many things, and you only remembered to give me this little bit. The lightning pool has always been a secret of the immortal realm. You were able to obtain the thunder obliteration bead, so you obtained the method to create the lightning pool. Although I don't know if the lightning pool can be used in the immortal realm, it is still a prototype, a direction. Shuji took the jade eye and nodded. Thank you. Then, Shuji turned to look in the direction of the spaceship and said, someone is looking for you. Xiao Hua nodded and looked in the direction Shuji was looking. He saw Gongshu Yixin and Gongshu Yiming flying towards him with excitement and a hint of nervousness. Gongshu Yixin flew in front while Gongshu Yiming hid behind her. Her face was still red. Xiao Hua smiled. He raised his hand and waved at the two women, indicating that they should fly over. Gongshu Yixin immediately sped up, leaving Gongshu Yiming far behind. Gongshu Yiming stomped her feet in the air and chased after them. That. Gongshu Yixin flew in front of Xiao Hua, tilted her head and looked at him. She hesitated for a moment, not knowing how to address him. Then she said, Senior Xiao, how did you cultivate? Xiao Hua was not unhappy to see this unsophisticated woman asking such a question. After all, only such a woman would have a pure heart. It was precisely this kind of cultivator that could be favored by the heavenly Tao, but he still said angrily, Palace Master Xingyue and Senior Shu are here. Why don't you greet them first? Yes, I was wrong. Gongshu Yixin was straightforward. She hurriedly bowed to Fairy Xingyu and Shuji and said, Greetings to the two seniors. I just feel that Senior Xiao is really unbelievable. When I saw him last time, he was only about the 5th level of essence energy. In just 200 years, how did he reach the Mahayana realm? I really don't understand. I remember that I blood sacrificially refined an imperial artifact to test my age. Seeing Gongshu Yixin speaking so casually, as though she was an old acquaintance of Shuji and Fairy Xingyu, Xiao Hua coughed twice and said, Miss Yixin. Yes, Senior. Although Gongshu Yixin was speaking to Fairy Xingyu, her ears were perked up. When she heard Xiao Hua calling her, she immediately said, What's the matter? Junior Gongshu Yiming greets the three seniors. At this moment, Gongshu Yiming had already flown over. She was completely different from Gongshu Yixin. She greeted Xiao Hua politely and placed Xiao Hua last. This meant respect and intimacy. Although Gongshu Yiming was respectful, she still could not see Fairy Xingyu's eyes. Fairy Xingyu asked with interest, Yi Xin, continue, sure. Gongshu Yi Xin was about to continue when Gongshu Yi Ming smiled and said, Sister Yi Xin, didn't you want to ask about the apprenticeship? Why are you talking about other things? That's right, that's right. Gongshu Yi Xin immediately came to her senses and asked Xiao Hua, Senior, didn't you say you would find a master for me? Where is he? Xiao Hua smiled and said, Your master is a good friend of mine. His name is Wen Chu. I don't know where he is now. Follow me. When you meet him, I will let you become his apprentice. Wen Chu. Shuji frowned slightly and said, What big words. Fairy Xingyu also felt strange and said, Xiao Hua, what is your good friend's cultivation level? How come I have never heard of his name? Junior's good friend is a hidden expert. Ordinary people don't know about him. Xiao Hua said and looked at Shu Ji with a guilty conscience. After all, during the 5-brocade cloud painting battle at Blackwind Ridge, Xiao Hua had revealed 3 heavenly hearts. Xiao Hua did not know if Shuji could see through it. Fortunately, Shuji did not suspect him. He only looked indifferently at the Chidi River in the distance. However, at this glance, Xiao Hua discovered something strange. This was because Shuji, who was as cold as a rock, actually had a rare sense of warmth when he saw Fairy Xingyu's appearance. What expert? How come I don't know? Fairy Xingyu obviously did not notice that warmth. She said angrily, Zhai Xinglu's Hall of Heroes has recorded all the high-level cultivators in the 3 continents. Even the Peng Lai Immortal Realm is no exception. Peng Lai Immortal Realm? Xiao Hua's heart skipped a beat. He smiled and said, Are the Dao sect cultivators on the Xian ranking all cultivators from the Peng Lai Immortal Realm? Of course. Fairy Xingyu nodded and said, If it's not the Peng Lai Immortal Realm, how can there be Dao sect cultivators with 8th grade essence power? Even if it's the Western Paradise, the Lei Yin Temple would never allow high-level Dao sect cultivators to exist. Senior, how can a cultivator escape from the Peng Lai Immortal Realm? Xiao Hua said with a smile, After all, that thing is in the hands of Immortal Emperor Gaochen. How would I know? You can ask your good friend who is a Confucian cultivator to ask the Immortal Emperor. Fairy Xingyu said coldly, He's called Wen Chu. I'm afraid he's on par with the Immortal Emperor, right? These words confused Gongshu Isin and Gongshu Yiming. They didn't dare to interrupt and could only wait by the side. Oh, by the way, Miss Yi Xin, what did you say about the imperial equipment that you refined? Fairy Xingyu suddenly remembered and asked Gongshu Isin with interest. Gongshu Isin answered without thinking, It's nothing. It's just that the imperial equipment measured that Senior Xiao is only 400 or 500 years old. Xiao Hua wanted to stop her, but he thought that if he continued to talk, he would definitely reveal himself. Therefore, he simply stopped talking and waited for the last denial. That's impossible. Fairy Xingyu said with a smile, If he was 500 years old then and 300 years old now, he's only 800 years old. Who in this world can cultivate to the Mahayana realm before the age of 1000? Not only did Fairy Xingyu not believe it, but even Shuji was stunned. He withdrew his gaze from the Chidi River and looked at Xiao Hua. Of course. Xiao Hua said with a smile, At that time, I said that the imperial equipment that Isin refined was a little off. What? When Gongshu Yi Xin heard Xiao Hua say that her imperial equipment wasn't good, she immediately retorted unconvinced, Senior, Junior's imperial equipment isn't any different on Senior's body, but on other people's bodies, it work. That's Xiao Hua's problem. Fairy Xingyu said with a smile, Isin, do you still have that imperial equipment? Gongshu Isin nodded and said, Of course. Ah, silly girl. Xiao Hua said earnestly, You should be careful. She is a senior, but she's only the palace master of Xingyue. What about me? I'm your future master's good friend. Can't you tell who's closer and who's further away? Don't be sold by others and count the copper coins for them. Yes. Gongshu Isin lowered her head and answered. Her figure flew more than 10 feet away from Fairy Xingyu. Little girl, how about I exchange this for your imperial equipment? Fairy Xingyu raised her hand and took out a jade eye and handed it to Gongshu Isin, saying, You can take a look at it before you decide. Okay. Gongshu Isin took the jade eye. After looking at it, Her face was filled with ecstasy and she said anxiously, "Senior, this, sure." Fairy Xingyu stopped Gongshu Isin from saying more and only asked, "Are you willing to exchange this?" Gongshu Isin thought for a moment and handed the jade eye back to Fairy Xingyu, saying, "It's better not to exchange." "Ayo, what do you mean not to exchange?" "You must exchange." Xiao Hua was anxious. With a flick of his sleeve, he took the jade eye and said, "Just give your imperial equipment to her. She's in the bidding business. If you don't take advantage of her, who do you want to take advantage of?" "Yes, senior." Gongshu Isin rolled her eyes and immediately understood Xiao Hua's words. Without hesitation, she took out the imperial equipment and respectfully handed it to Fairy Xingyu, saying, "Thank you, senior." Chapter 4499. Of course, Fairy Xingyu did not care about Xiao Hua's narrow-mindedness. She took the imperial equipment and activated it slightly. Seeing layers of rainbows appear, Fairy Xingyu smiled and said, "Who said that Miss Yixin is stupid? It is precisely this kind of pure-minded cultivator who can become an array master. I think this imperial equipment is really well refined. Xiao Hua, your good friend is lucky." Of course. Xiao Hua handed the jade eye to Gongshu Yixin and said, "Yixin will definitely become an array master of her generation in the future. She will definitely be unprecedented." "Haha, if she becomes unprecedented, what about her master?" Fairy Xingyu pursed her lips and said with a smile, "She will naturally be an unprecedented master." Xiao Hua was not afraid of Fairy Xingyu's sarcasm. "This girl cultivates the 5 Qi thunder?" Shuji also spoke. He looked at Xiao Hua thoughtfully and said, "It's suitable for you to accept her as your disciple. I have enough disciples, so I won't snatch others' opportunities." Xiao Hua touched his nose and smiled bitterly. "You can't accept any more." Fairy Xingyu said with a smile, "There is no more space on the Xianhuang list. Here is a small thing for you." Shuji casually took out a palm-sized arc from his bosom, in which there were some lightning threads that formed a knot. He said, "This is a natural object. It may not be comparable to the 5 brocade cloud painting, but if you can comprehend something from it, it will be more useful than any secret art or lightning array." Of course, Gongshu Yiming did not dare to act on her own. She looked at Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua smiled and said, "Why are you looking at me? Why wouldn't you want something that is delivered to your door?" "Thank you, senior." Gongshu Yiming was overjoyed. She took the arc-shaped object and stood beside Gongshu Yixin happily, looking down at it. "Ah, it's good to be young." Fairy Xingyu looked at the imperial equipment in her hand that flew across the sky like a rainbow bridge. Each section of the light was like a growth ring, which seemed to record the vicissitudes of life. She could not help but sigh. Maybe you don't have to care about the past. As long as you live each day well. Shuji did not look at Fairy Xingyu. Fairy Xingyu bit her lips slightly and replied, "A person will always be lonely. Only when the 2 butterflies fly will there be happiness." "Xiao Hua, look at that flying boat." Shuji ignored Fairy Xingyu as if he was deaf. He pointed at a strange flower-like flying boat in the distance and said, "That's the Dongfang family's bamboo flying boat." "Bamboo flowers?" Xiao Hua stared blankly for a moment, then asked curiously, "The flowers of bamboo? Don't tell me, bamboo can bloom?" Shuji replied indifferently, "Bamboo will naturally bloom. However, there is a saying in ancient books, every 60 years, the bamboo will change its roots, and the roots will give birth to flowers, and the flowers will bear fruit, and the fruit will wither, and the fruit will fall and come back to life. Moreover, the bamboo cultivator sifted through the wind and played with the moon. He lived a carefree and unrestrained life, elegant and untainted. He was a modest gentleman. People often use bamboo as their symbol. However, no one knew that although bamboo had a noble character, after being in the mortal world for a long time, it would also be polluted. This bamboo flower was the bamboo's self-cleansing will. Whenever a bamboo flower appeared, it meant that the bamboo could no longer endure the filth and wanted to cleanse itself and be reborn. The Dongfang family is one of the 4 great families of the hidden immortal continent. They used bamboo flowers as the symbol of their family. It's really thought-provoking. Xiao Hua looked at Ruojian, Ruisui, and the rice-like bamboo flowers and said with a wry smile, Junior only feels that this flying boat is uglier than Senior's flying boat, Fut. Fairy Xingyue couldn't help but laugh and said, don't let Dongfang Qianghao hear this, or he will fight you to the death. Senior. Gongshu Yiming was very obedient. At this time, he had already received the things that Shuji gave him. He carefully pointed at another flying boat and said, that orchid-like flying boat belongs to the Shimen family. Yen, this Xiao understands. Xiao Hua nodded. An empty valley, a solitary flower, elegant and pleasant, is a virtuous person in the world. The Shimen family wants to be a solitary flower, but this Xiao doesn't know much about the four great families. I don't know if they can do it. All solitary flowers are fake. If they want to be a solitary flower, why would they appear in front of the Xingyue palace? Fairy Xingyue smiled coldly, looking very disdainful of the four great families. Xiao Hua smiled slightly and pointed at the flying boat that was blooming with plum blossoms. He said with a smile, this is a noble person with lofty ideals. He stresses on exploring the waves and cutting the snow and ice. I'm afraid he's from the Nangong family, right? Senior is wrong, Gongshu Yiming corrected him bluntly. The Nangong family stresses elegance and independence. They don't follow the trend of the world and want to be a hermit. Their symbol is the chrysanthemum. Hearing this, Xiao Hua also snorted and said lightly, Senior Xingyue said that the Shimen family's solitary flower is empty, but I said that the Nangong family's independence is bullshit. If they want to be a hermit, they can just hide in the mountains. Why do they have to show off here? Speaking of this, Xiao Hua suddenly asked, Senior, the ancients often say that plum blossoms, orchid, bamboo, and chrysanthemum are the four gentlemen of flowers. They stress on pride, seclusion, firmness, and indifference. Junior wants to ask, is this ancient person earlier than the four great families? Ha ha. Without waiting for Xiao Hua to finish speaking, Fairy Xingyue understood his meaning. She covered her mouth and laughed, is there a need to ask? This ancient person, of course, is after the four great families. If there were no four great families, how could there be Confucian cultivators? If there were no Confucian cultivators, how could there be 100 schools of contending? In that case, Xiao Hua said with a smile, the title of plum blossoms, orchid, bamboo, and chrysanthemum is, some people flattering the four great families? Yes, if it wasn't a big flattery, how could four ordinary flowers be regarded as the four gentlemen? Fairy Xingyue also greatly belittled the Confucian cultivators. Gongshu Isin and Gongshu Yiming were dumbfounded. To be honest, they had never thought of this problem. A good illusion was actually said to be so unbearable by Xiao Hua. However, if they thought about it carefully, what Xiao Hua said was very reasonable. Why were the four gentlemen of flowers not lotus, not redbud, and not jade lotus? Why were they the most ordinary symbols of the four great families? Don't listen to their nonsense. Shuji said in a faint tone, the predecessors can't be verified. Maybe the four great families picked the ones they liked from the four gentlemen. It's also possible. As the five of them spoke, the clouds above the four flying boats began to disperse. Many Confucian cultivators flew out of the flying boats, and these cultivators flew to different places. Some cultivators from the various families that had been resting in the mountain range also flew out and landed on the four flying boats. It seemed that they were going to visit the disciples of the four great families. It seems that there are many Confucian cultivator families close to the four great families. Xiao Hua narrowed his eyes, looking at the Confucian cultivator disciples flying out, and said meaningfully. Fairy Xingyue said with a double meaning, whether there are many or few, I'm afraid there are more than the Sun family. Separated for a long time, united for a long time, divided for a long time. This seems to be a trend. Xiao Hua nodded. Now is the time of turbulence, and it is also the time of heroes. If so, is it also the time for the Dao sect to rise? Fairy Xingyue looked at Xiao Hua and reminded him worriedly. How would I dare to think about something that even the two seniors don't dare to think about? Xiao Hua smiled bitterly. Besides, the rise of the Dao sect is not something that can be accomplished by one person's strength, nor is it something that can be achieved by one or two generations of disciples. Overestimating oneself is like a mantis trying to stop a chariot. You also know that it's like a mantis trying to stop a chariot. Shuji said with a rare smile. The Tao sect in the world has declined early. Today, the hidden immortal Tao sect is opened. With me, Xiao Hua, in the world, how dare I let my disciples be bullied and humiliated? Ha ha. Xiao Hua laughed. This is just one of my ambitions. With my strength and the time I have left, I'm afraid it's impossible to achieve it. Shuji didn't say much. Fairy Xingyue smiled and said, You underestimate yourself too much. With your current ability, although you can't revive the Tao sect, the prosperity of the Tao sect is second only to the ancient times. Moreover, Xingyue. Shuji frowned slightly and scolded. Yes, yes. Fairy Xingyue rolled her eyes and said, And because of your gather, we noticed you. Xiao Hua naturally didn't believe Fairy Xingyue's words, but he didn't care that Fairy Xingyue didn't completely reveal her meaning. Fairy Xingyue must have said that he had the ability to revive the Tao sect, but Xiao Hua knew himself well. He might have the ability to fight against the Immortal Emperor and the Vairocana Buddha, but it was absolutely impossible for him to revive the Tao sect. The current Fortune Gate was not afraid of any of the families of Confucian cultivators, the Sun family of the Immortal Palace, the Buddhist sect, or even any great saint of the demon clan. However, the powerful Tao sect of the ancient times was destroyed by the joint forces of the Immortals, Buddhists, and demons. How could the Fortune Gate be a match for the joint forces of the Immortals, Buddhists, and demons? Seeing that the three seniors were talking about the revival of the Tao sect in front of them, Gongshu Isin and Gongshu Yiming looked at each other and lowered their heads slightly, pretending not to hear. By the way, Shuji suddenly asked, Xiao Hua, it seems that you are very resistant to the four great families. Could it be that you and the Sun family of the Immortal Palace, Senior, have you forgotten? I have a good friend who is a Confucian cultivator. He is the Immortal General of the Immortal Palace. Xiao Hua reminded. Haha, I forgot. That Sun Wu is quite interesting. Shuji nodded and then raised his eyebrows. He looked at the flying boat of the four great families and said, The disciples of the four great families are coming. I don't want to see them. You deal with them yourself. After saying that, Shuji flew towards the Chidi River. Xiao Hua looked at Gongshu Isin and Gongshu Yiming and said, You two accompany the seniors and get to know the disciples of the four great families. Perhaps it will be beneficial for you in the future. Yes, senior. Gongshu Isin and Gongshu Yiming agreed in a low voice. They watched Xiao Hua leave with Shuji. When they turned around, they saw four martial grandmasters flying towards them. Fairy Xingyue didn't care, but Gongshu Yiming didn't dare to. She hurriedly wanted to greet them, but when she saw that Gongshu Isin didn't move, she hurriedly pulled on Gongshu Isin's sleeve. Just as she was about to speak, Fairy Xingyue said, You don't have to greet them. Chapter 4500. Yes, Senior. Gongshu Yiming hurriedly answered, standing there. We are Dongfang Yushan, Shimen Hangyue, Nangong Pingping, and Beiming Qi Han. Greetings, Master of Stars and Moon. The four extraordinarily dignified 7th grade elemental force grandmasters cupped their fists in greeting. Greetings, Immortals. Fairy Xingyu did not find it strange and said with a smile, The last time I explored the Star Moon Palace, the four aristocratic families did not send the four fellow immortals. I presume that the four fellow immortals have already obtained opportunities in the Star Moon Palace and become literary sages? Dongfang Yushan smiled. You're right. The patriarchs of the four aristocratic families also sent us to greet you. Thank you for providing us with information. If you need our help in the future, please feel free to ask. When it comes to cooperation, both sides will benefit, but if we don't, both sides will suffer. Fairy Xingyu nodded slightly. Please go back and report to the patriarchs of the four aristocratic families that Zhai Xinglu is Xingyu's Zhai Xinglu and Moon Embracing Palace is Xingyu's Moon Embracing Palace. If they leave Xingyu, they will no longer be Zhai Xinglu and Moon Embracing Palace. The four Confucian cultivators looked at each other. Although they did not quite understand the meaning of these words, they somewhat understood in their hearts. They hurriedly nodded and said, "We understand. After we reach the Star Moon Palace, we will definitely pass on these words to the Patriarch." "Good." Fairy Xingyu flicked her sleeves and said, "The signs of the Star Moon Palace's appearance have already appeared. It won't be long before the Star Moon Palace appears. As usual, I will go in first, followed by the 4 aristocratic families." "Thank you, Fairy." Dongfang Yushan looked at everyone and said, "We will take our leave first. See you in the Star Moon Palace." Millimeter. Fairy Xingyu responded and turned to fly to the resting place of the Zhai Xinglu disciples. Dongfang Yushan flew back with Beiming Qihan and the others. Nangong Pingping smiled and said in a low voice, "Brothers, this master of stars and moon seems very arrogant. She doesn't seem to take us seriously." "Why?" "Brother Nangong seems to be interested in this woman." Beiming Qihan looked at Nangong Pingping with interest and smiled. "I'm interested." Nangong Pingping did not hide his intentions and replied, "It's a pity that before I left, the Patriarch reminded me again and again that I must not disrespect the Master of Stars and Moons. I have the heart but not the strength. As long as you have the heart, you have the intention." Shimon Hungyue said with a smile, "This huge star moon really makes all the forces in the world envious. If you can deal with the Star Moon Lord, doesn't Xingyue belong to the Nangong family?" Nangong Pingping hurriedly waved his hand and said, "I only have the intention. The one with the power is Brother Dongfang. As long as he lifts a finger, Xingyue, sure." Dongfang Yushan hurriedly stopped Nangong Pingping when he saw that Nangong Pingping's words were getting more and more unbearable. "Brothers, just say what you want, don't be too frivolous. How could someone who could establish Star Moon be an ordinary person? The Patriarch has already told us to be careful, so why should we look for trouble? I don't know about other cultivators, but senior brother Heng Sai, who entered the Star Moon Palace last time, clearly said that the Master of Stars and Moons is a mutant. If you want to obtain an opportunity in the Star Moon Palace and come back alive, don't provoke the Master of Stars and Moons." Nangong Pingping shrunk his neck and said with a smile, "I'm just saying." The disciples of the 4 great families flew back to the flying boat as they spoke. Beside the Chidi River, Xiao Hua looked at the sparkling water and the moonlight and transmitted his voice, "Senior, Shuji did not understand why Xiao Hua transmitted his voice and replied, "What's the matter?" Although Xiao Hua was about to speak, he hesitated for a moment when the words reached his mouth. "Just say it." Shuji said, "As long as it doesn't involve the secrets of the immortal world, I can answer you. Senior, in your hometown, before you ascended, did you have a dual cultivation partner?" Xiao Hua gritted his teeth and asked. "You can't invade my privacy." Shuji refused without hesitation. "All right," Xiao Hua said helplessly. "Actually, Junior thinks that Fairy Xingyue is pretty good. She also has some feelings for Senior. Junior doesn't know if Senior can see it, but as an outsider, Junior can see it clearly. Junior missed a lot of good times before. I don't want Senior to have regrets in the future. Junior thinks that even if there is a gap between 2 celestial venerables in the immortal world, the matter between you two is a private matter and has nothing to do with the Palace of Punishment and the Palace of Justice." "I know." Without waiting for Xiao Hua to finish speaking, Shuji replied in an unusually calm tone, "As the saying goes, time breeds love. In the 3 continents, only Xingyue and I have something to talk about. The 2 of us have been together for so long, how can I not know her thoughts? Then, Senior's heart also has a knot in it." Xiao Hua somewhat understood and asked tentatively, "That's right." Shuji nodded. "Could it be that you don't have a knot in your heart? Shue didn't leave a mark in your heart. Forget it, Senior." Xiao Hua raised his hands and surrendered. "Just pretend that Junior didn't say anything. It's good that you understand." Shuji looked at the surging river and whispered, "Everyone has their own experiences, everyone has their own choices, and everyone has their own consequences to face. I am a punishment envoy, so I naturally know more than you. In terms of feelings, when I was cultivating in my hometown, I could be considered romantic and elegant. But when you walk through flowers, you will always step on the petals and may even be injured by the thorns. When you turn around, other than the fragrance of the flowers on your clothes, how much beauty can you retain? Time flies, The autumn wind urges people, when the snowflakes flutter, even the branches of the flowers will wither. Hehe, that's true. Xiao Hua said with a smile, Senior's appearance is much more handsome than Junior's, and you have also learned a lot in this aspect. Junior just wanted to remind Senior. Roar. Xiao Hua wanted to say something more, but somewhere in the Chidi River, a loud roar suddenly sounded, and beams of starlight and moonlight fell. It was actually a few great demons fighting. Sometimes I envy these demons. Shuji looked and said with some emotion, if they want to fight, they fight, and if they want to scold, they have no scruples. Their cultivation is also unique, they don't care about Dao heart, Dao realm, nor are they afraid of inner demons, they only need to temper their demon bodies. Those are all demons with inheritances. Xiao Hua said with a smile, there are also the vast majority of demons who don't know how to cultivate, they also learn from our Dao sect's human race, wanting to condense a demon core in their body. Without waiting for Xiao Hua to finish, Shuji said, you are wrong. This world doesn't have a completely orthodox cultivation method. In the Demon League, there are also those who cultivate demon cores. Ah! Xiao Hua was a bit dumbfounded. He was proficient in demon cultivation. That heaven-defying Thunder Phoenix was his clone. How is that possible? Nothing is impossible. Shuji glanced at Xiao Hua, somewhat surprised by his shock, and replied, the reason why the Demon League is called the Demon League is because it is made up of extremely suitable demon territories, and different demon territories have different cultivation methods. Either condense the body, condense the core, or Dharma body, or devour the demon soul and condense the soul body. Of course, there are many other methods, even I don't know. Alas, it's a mess. Xiao Hua sighed. Junior only thought that Junior knew the truth, but when the truth was revealed, Junior knew. The truth is not the truth, the illusion is also the truth. You are right. Shuji nodded, what I said may not be right. After all, the Demon League is only the Demon League. What about above the immortal world? Above the Demon League? Xiao Hua suddenly asked, Senior, what is the purpose of cultivation? It's. Shuji smiled, it's a secret. Xiao Hua shrugged and said in a low voice, all right, just pretend that Junior didn't ask anything. The truth of the matter is the truth of the world, it is also like water flowing when the channel is right. If it is not the time for you to know, then you don't have to know. And when it is time for you to know, the truth will float in front of your eyes without waiting for you to find it. Shuji said, I have been a punishment envoy for so many years, I have also experienced many things. From these things, I have obtained 4 words, let nature take its course. Xiao Hua's words hit the nail on the head. Yes, that's right. Shuji nodded, not sounding surprised. You have a very easygoing temper, it is easy for you to let nature take its course. This is also Junior's shortcoming. You can say that I am an unambitious person, I like to live a comfortable life that is not as good as the best, but better than the worse. This is already the best life. Shuji sighed. Ayo, why is the fight getting fiercer? As they spoke, another 100 great demons joined the battle. The battle was getting bigger and bigger. Xiao Hua asked worriedly, don't we need to shout for them to stop? Don't worry about them. Shuji glanced casually and said, the demon clan has always been like this. Before the Xingyue Palace appears, the power of the starlight will become violent. This will incur the wrath of some great demons with unstable foundations, and it will be easy for fights to break out. When their eyes turn red from fighting, that is when the Xingyue Palace appears. Hearing this, Xiao Hua hurriedly turned to look at Zhai Xinglu's spaceship. Indeed, Fairy Xingyue had already given the order from Zhai Xinglu, and a group of Zhai Xinglu's disciples began to prepare for departure. Xiao Hua narrowed his eyes and looked at Chidi River. The space that had been disturbed by the fluctuations earlier had sped up again. Layer upon layer of silver tadpole-like light spots had already covered nearly 10,000 miles of the river surface. Under the silver light, the previously orange river surface gave off a crimson glow, looking very strange. Xiao Hua muttered in his heart, the Xingyue Palace is finally going to appear. This famous Xingyue Palace. What will it look like? Thinking of the Xingyue Palace, Xiao Hua unconsciously thought of the illusory array in the ruins when he fought with the unrestrained heavenly demon. A shuddering feeling quietly emerged from the bottom of his heart. Or rather, A shadow gradually shrouded his heart. Could it be a trap? Xiao Hua couldn't help but look at Shu Ji. Shu Ji didn't pay attention to anything else, but instead focused his attention on the sky above the Chidi River. His face was slightly nervous. Xiao Hua was slightly relieved. It shouldn't be. This is not the first time we have entered the Xingyue Palace. Shu Ji and Fairy Xingyue have already explored the passageway a few times and returned safely. Chapter 4501. Another hour passed. Suddenly, the crescent moon that was hanging in the sky for half a day suddenly streaked across the vast sky and nailed itself in the middle of the night sky. Furthermore, the crescent moon from before suddenly expanded, revealing other parts of the shadow. A full moon was swollen and scattered moonlight. The night sky that was originally filled with brilliant stars was now filled with no stars at all. This moonlight was so bright that tens of thousands of miles around the Chidi River were as bright as day. In just a moment, the full moon seemed to shatter, turning into tens of thousands of fragments. Even the moonlight that filled the sky was also divided. Pillars of light appeared in the night sky, and at this time, the night sky seemed to be unable to cover the Chidi River, turning into darkness that was mixed in between the pillars of light. Boom! A muffled sound rang out. Although it came from the horizon, it also shook the hearts of all the humans and demons. The entire world shook under this roar. Like a watermelon being opened, the stars in the night sky were like melon seeds inside the melon, flashing with a black brilliance. It was clearly a black brilliance, but in the dark night, it was clearly seen by people. However, when Xiao Hua's eyes turned, the black turned into a red color. After the red color, the 6 colors of orange, yellow, green, cyan, blue, and purple flashed clearly. In the end, every starlight turned into a halo, revealing a translucent milky white starlight. Wong wong wong. On the Chidi River, the space within tens of thousands of miles was shaking. The river water that previously seemed to be tightly pressed down by a large hand was now slowly being split. In just a few breaths, the seemingly endless and bottomless Chidi River was actually split into 2 halves. The severed river water was not like an ordinary river water, forming waves, but was still as calm as before. Swish swish swish. At the same time the Chidi River was cut off, the moonlight that had previously splashed across the 1,000 demons' sacred realm also began to gather, falling within a radius of 1,000,000 miles around the Chidi River. The mottled light and shadow looked like a layer of a giant tree's crown blocking the 1,000 demons' sacred realm. As the light and shadow fell, a thick shadow gradually appeared. An indescribable majesty, heaviness, fear, and suppression seeped out from this shadow. With the appearance of this black shadow, countless chaotic fluctuations rushed out in all directions. Space began to be disturbed, and the heaven and earth origin energy, as well as the aura of righteousness, turned into chaos. An apocalyptic pressure descended upon the Crimson River, primordial world. As soon as Xiao Hua came in contact with this fluctuation and aura, his expression immediately changed. He was simply too familiar with this aura. The ruins were still fine, as the aura of the human clan had rushed out of the desolation aura. However, the incomplete desolation continent was filled with this kind of desolation aura. However, on the incomplete eldritch continent, the aura of the eldritch continent was not complete, or rather, it was as ordinary as grass. It did not have the domineering and ferocious aura of the Star Moon Palace before him. Boom, boom, boom. In the middle of the moon, the silhouette of the Star Moon Palace was revealed. Following that, countless pillars of stars shot down. Just like the moonlight, the starlight that had previously covered the entire 1,000 demons' sacred realm was now all projected onto the outline of the Star Moon Palace. Pillars of starlight transcended time and space and landed on the Chidi River. The pillars of starlight were first twisted into knots before rushing into the outline of the Star Moon Palace. In just a few breaths' time, a huge object whose entire outline could not be seen clearly appeared above the Chidi River. This huge object was completely condensed from the brilliance of the moon and stars. Countless huge spots of light swam wantonly within it. Every time it moved, a majestic desolation aura would rush into the 1,000 demons' sacred realm. Wherever this desolation aura passed, hundreds of miles of space would be penetrated, forming a chaotic layer that isolated the Star-Moon Palace from the Thousand Demons' sacred realm. Senior, is this the Star-Moon Palace? Seeing that the Star-Moon Palace had appeared, but it was not what he had imagined at all, Xiao Hua could not help but ask, "Why, can't I see the palace door?" "I can't see the palace either." Shuji replied indifferently, "Who told you that the Star-Moon Palace must be a palace? Who told you that something named by Fairy Xing Yu must have a plaque of the Star-Moon Palace?" "Sigh, I understand now." Xiao Hua sighed. This Star-Moon Palace might not be a palace at all. It might not be, however, it's most likely still a palace, Shuji replied. "When we first entered, the Star-Moon Palace already looked like a palace. Otherwise, why would Fairy Xing Yu name this object the Star-Moon Palace? Moreover, there are also halls inside the Star-Moon Palace." "What about the palace door?" Xiao Hua smiled bitterly. "Without the palace door, how do we enter?" Don't be anxious, Shuji said unhurriedly. "The entrance will appear eventually. It's just a matter of time." "Millimeter, that's true. Why should I be anxious?" Xiao Hua nodded. "Indeed." Shuji replied casually. "You're not anxious, but the eunuch is." "What?" Xiao Hua was stunned. He did not quite understand. "It's nothing." Shuji was slightly taken aback. He then explained, "This is a saying from my hometown." "Oh." Seeing that Shuji did not explain further, Xiao Hua responded and released his divine thought. However, when his divine thought touched the chaotic layer of space, it was immediately shattered by the space. He could not pass through it at all. At the edge of the space, the desolation aura was abnormally dense. This Star-Moon Palace really looks like an ancient relic. At this point, Xiao Hua no longer had any doubts about the origins of the Star-Moon Palace. This was because he could clearly see with his naked eye that this Star-Moon Palace was somewhat similar to Pangu's axe. What the Star-Moon Palace had revealed earlier was not a real palace, but an illusory silhouette. Only after the pillar of light from the stars and moon had fallen did it solidify into a real body. Seeing this, Xiao Hua had some understanding. Wasn't Pangu's axe the same? On the Desolation continent, Pangu's axe was just an illusory silhouette. Only in the three continents would Pangu's axe become a real body. Of course, the Star-Moon Palace was on the other side of a chaotic layer of space. If this layer of space disappeared, the complete Star-Moon Palace would definitely be revealed. Xiao Hua and Shu Ji were fully focused on observing the Star-Moon Palace. The other forces were also rubbing their palms together. The disciples of Zhai Xinglu had already flown behind Xiao Hua and Shu Ji, lining up in the formation they had rehearsed earlier, waiting for the right time. In the distance, the disciples of the four great clans were also waiting in formation, waiting for the Star-Moon Palace to make a move. Behind the four great clans and the Star-Moon Palace, the 100 schools of thought, which were Confucian cultivators, were also eyeing covetously. The Star-Moon Palace was huge. In other places, some Daoist cultivators, some Buddhist protectors, and most of the great demons of the demon clan released their remarkable abilities, waiting for the Star-Moon Palace to open. Fairy Xingyu flew to Shuji's side and said softly, "So far, I haven't seen anything unusual." "No." Shuji shook his head. "The power of the stars and moon this time is too strong. The spatial barrier around the Star-Moon Palace is also too thick. I'm afraid it won't be easy to pass through." "Mph, isn't it that 7 stars great sage from the Great Sage Hall?" Fairy Xingyu gritted her teeth in hatred. He didn't become a sage earlier or later, but he actually became a sage at this juncture. Moreover, not only did he trigger the 7 stars transit, but he also triggered the 10,000 stars transit after entering the Great Sage Hall. Of course, this greatly increased the strength of the 1,000 Demons' sacred realm, but it also triggered too much of the power of the stars and moon in the 3 continents. Shuji did not complain like Fairy Xingyu. Instead, he said softly, "We can pass through this spatial barrier easily, but the disciples of Zhai Xinglu and those cultivators who are sensitive to the power of the stars and moon will be in trouble." "What are you afraid of?" Fairy Xingyu pursed her lips and smiled. She looked as if she had a card up her sleeve. She said, "If it was the last time, we would naturally have to worry and waste our dharmic powers. But this time, we don't have to worry at all. Although Fairy Xing Yu did not look at Xiao Hua smiled bitterly. Before Shuji could speak, he said, "Seniors, you don't have to worry about this. Leave it to me. I'll keep them in the Kunlun mirror first and release them after they enter." "There's another problem," Fairy Xing Yu said worriedly. "I'm afraid that we won't be able to find a pavilion in the Star Moon Palace where we can use storage bags. That'll be troublesome." "Ah!" Xiao Hua was stunned and asked curiously, "Senior, do you mean there's no way to use imperial weapons or magic treasures like the Heaven and Earth bracelet in the Star Moon Palace?" "Of course." Fairy Xing Yu smiled bitterly. "I don't know why the Star Moon Palace is so strange. Even among the immortals. Sigh, it seems that there are very few such restrictions. Let's keep these cultivators in the Kunlun mirror first," Shuji ordered without hesitation. "Although the Starry Sky Maze is difficult, we have a 20% chance of success. Including them, it's only 40%. Now that Xiao Hua is with us, even if he has a 10% chance, it's still 30%. It's best if these cultivators can come out. If they can't, then they can't." "Okay." Xiao Hua nodded and said to Fairy Xing Yu, "Fairy, come with me and let those disciples of Zhai Xinglu enter my Kunlun mirror." "Okay." Fairy Xing Yu responded and was about to turn around and fly back. Woo! A gust of wind suddenly whistled. In the distance, where the demon clan had gathered, a great demon that was at least 10,000 feet in size suddenly flapped its wings and pounced toward Xingyue Palace, wanting to take the lead. "Damn it!" Fairy Xingyu paused and raised her right hand. A halo of stars appeared on her right index finger. However, Fairy Xingyu was still a little too slow. Just as she was about to point it out, the great demon had already rushed into the chaotic space. Swoosh! The great demon's body landed. Dazzling starlight shone from the great demon's body as it rushed into the space. The great demon's body instantly expanded by more than 30%. In just a few breaths, the great demon's body had completely disappeared into the space. At this moment, wherever the great demon's body passed, starlight shone and traces of its flight were clearly visible. What puzzled Xiao Hua and the others was that although the great demon seemed to be approaching the Star Moon Palace in an arc, what was revealed in the chaotic interlayer space was actually a complicated bowknot. Chapter 4502. When the great demon flew into the middle of the chaotic mezzanine, the light from his body was suddenly extinguished. His body, which had expanded previously, rapidly shrank at the same time and returned to its original size in the blink of an eye. Not only that, but in the next few breaths, the great demon's body continued to shrink until it was only 30% of its original size. "Humph, you're courting death." Fairy Xingyu's expression was cautious at first, but when she saw the great demon's body shrink, a sneer appeared on her face. She said to Xiao Hua, "Let's go. There's no need to look anymore. The door to the Star Moon Palace has not been opened yet. If you go in now, you'll only die." "Oh." Xiao Hua nodded and retreated steadily. His gaze was still fixed on the great demon. Sure enough, Xiao Hua had only flown a few dozen feet when the great demon's body and mind suddenly swayed in the spatial mezzanine. Like a kite that had lost its string, it kept tumbling in the wind. Every time it tumbled, the great demon's body shrank. When it had shrunk to the size of a few dozen feet, it turned into a shadow and fell into the Chidi River. Unfortunately, there were no waves on the Chidi River. Who knew what kind of spatial crevice this reckless great demon had fallen into? "You want to enter the Star Moon Palace before my Zhai Xinglu? What a joke." Fairy Xingyu said hatefully. If the Star Moon Palace was so easy to enter, would the 4 aristocratic families let my Zhai Xinglu enter first? Xiao Hua smiled faintly and did not agree. He was still wondering why the spatial mezzanine was so strange. Fairy Xingyu ordered, and the disciples of Zhai Xinglu obeyed. Xiao Hua took out the Kunlun mirror and activated his dharmic powers to send the disciples into the Kunlun wonderland. Gongshu Isin, Gongshu Yiming, and Mo Jianli naturally followed him in. However, they were in the Shenhua continent. Zhai Xinglu was now the center of attention. Everything that Xiao Hua did fell into everyone's eyes. Seeing the disciples of Zhai Xinglu disappear, The disciples of the 4 aristocratic families smiled thought-provoking. While Xiao Hua was casting his technique, Shuji transmitted his voice over from afar. Fairy Xing Yu did not disturb Xiao Hua and flew over. At that moment, the thick and massive silhouette of the Star Moon Palace began to move. The light of the stars and the moon that had previously condensed into the silhouette of the Star Moon Palace flowed like stars. High up in the sky, the light of the stars and the moon continued to fall, colliding with the flowing brilliance of the Xingyue Palace. A scene that was more dazzling than all the fireworks in the world was presented before everyone. The light fell into the chaotic interlayer in the middle, refracting layers of magnificent illusions. These illusions were like a fairyland, like the traces of a devil. Traces of unfathomable fluctuations were also emitted. The fireworks lasted for the time it took to brew a cup of tea before a saber-shaped brilliance strangely flashed past. Then, a cluster of waves rushed out from the Star Moon Palace. The fireworks were split in half by the saberlight. The waves seeped out from the gap and a shadow that looked like the word convex was born from the fireworks. As soon as this shadow appeared, it immediately expanded along with the fluctuations. Layers upon layers of overlapping shadows rushed into the chaotic interlayer of space. What was very strange was that when this shadow entered the interlayer, it began to spiral and twist in the same way as when the great demon flew in. In just a moment, countless convex-shaped shadows began to spread throughout the entire interlayer of space. No one could tell which shadow was connected to which. Xiao Hua. Shuji called out in a deep voice. This is the door of the Star Moon Palace. Let's prepare to enter. Xiao Hua had just kept the Kunlun mirror and flew to Shuji and Fairy Xing Yu's side. When he saw this situation, he naturally knew that the Star Moon Palace door had appeared. However, what Xiao Hua had never expected was that this Star Moon Palace door was a little too strange, wasn't it? Not to mention that there was no lofty gatehouse, not to mention that there were no imposing flower pillars, there wasn't even the outline of the door. It was just a specious shadow. Of course, the way this shadow appeared was really annoying. The path that stepped into the shadow was filled with death. Xiao Hua involuntarily cried out, "Ah? This is the so-called Star Moon Palace door? I've thought about it for a long time and looked forward to it for so many years. I really never dreamed that the Star Moon Palace door would be like this. Do you think that the palace door is all dignified? Do you think that the palace door is all carved beams and painted pillars?" Fairy Xing Yu sneered. "Don't you see that there are 9 other doors in the Immortal Palace? In addition to these 9 doors, there are also side doors and side doors. If an ordinary Confucian cultivator wants to enter the Immortal Palace, do you expect him to enter through the main door?" Xiao Hua touched his nose in boredom and said with a wry smile, "Yes, cats have their own ways, and mice have their own ways. Could it be that the Star Moon Palace door is different from the usual one? In the eyes of the ancient god clan, we are indeed inferior to cats and mice." Fairy Xing Yu sighed. However, after Fairy Xing Yu finished speaking, Shuji exclaimed in surprise, "Oh no. Xing Yu, look, the light path of the palace door did not break through the spatial mezzanine. We are not even qualified to set foot in the palace door. How is that possible?" Fairy Xing Yu was shocked. She hurriedly looked over. Sure enough, countless convex light shadows covered the spatial mezzanine. However, these light shadows were all within the mezzanine, and none of them fell on the edge of the mezzanine. D**mnet, D**mnet, D**mnet. Fairy Xing Yu cursed angrily and flew toward the Qidi River. Shuji looked at Xiao Hua and slowed down a little. Xiao Hua asked in a low voice, "Senior, what did it look like in the past?" In the past, the shadows of these palace doors came out from the spatial mezzanine. There were tens of thousands of shadows in the space. Shuji explained in a low voice, "We only needed to rely on our celestial artifacts to find the correct shadows and the correct route. Now that the shadows of the palace door can't be seen, Senior's celestial artifacts can't work, right?" Xiao Hua asked. "Yes, that's right." Shuji nodded and explained, "As you can see, the waves that are emitted from the Star Moon Palace are left behind from the ancient times when the Star Moon Palace was being refined. It is different from the waves of Yuan Qi of the heaven and earth and the waves of the formation. When these fluctuations fall into the space of the 1,000 demons' sacred realm, they will collapse the nearby space, forming a kind of mezzanine. Within this mezzanine, there is a kind of disorderly chaos. There is no heaven-earth essence chi, no righteous chi, and only a little light from the stars and the moon. You saw it just now. When a 7th grade essence chi great demon falls into this space, it becomes an ordinary demonic beast. Not to mention our celestial artifacts, even. Immortal artifacts can't be activated here. In other words, the two seniors can't be sure which of these countless shadows of the palace door is the real one. Xiao Hua frowned and immediately thought of the situation when he was searching for the entrance to the mysterious water palace on the Saint River. The entrance to the mysterious water palace was formed by the light shadows through a vortex. It looked different from the entrance to the Star-Moon Palace, but in fact, they were similar. However, the palace door of the Star-Moon Palace was more complicated and harder to find. These shadows of the palace door are all fake. Shuji's expression did not change as he explained faintly, only the door that appeared on the Star-Moon Palace is the real one. What we are really looking for is the fluctuation that rushed out of the door. This fluctuation repels the disorderly chaos around it, forming a temporary passage. In this mezzanine space, only this passage is safe. Seniors, why didn't you tell me earlier? Xiao Hua smiled bitterly. Otherwise, I could have thought of other ways, Fairy Xingyu said helplessly, because we have a probing celestial artifact. The previous few times, this space mezzanine was not a problem at all. I didn't expect that we can't even step into the Star-Moon Palace's door this time. There are so many shadows of the palace door. Xiao Hua looked around and secretly wondered if he should activate the Delusion Breaker Dharma Eye. After all, the Delusion Breaker Dharma Eye was a rather secretive divine ability. He did not want so many humans and demon clans to know about it for the time being. There are more than that. Fairy Xingyu smiled bitterly. Ah, there's more. Xiao Hua was shocked. As expected, before he could finish his sentence, he saw the Star-Moon Palace move again. The brilliance of the stars and moon that had condensed into the Star-Moon Palace flowed again. The protruding door also moved. As it moved, another wave of fluctuation was generated from the door, crashing into the spatial mezzanine. Illusory palace doors that were exactly the same as the previous one appeared again. They either intersected or overlapped with the previous ones, causing the entire spatial mezzanine to become even more chaotic. Damn it! Fairy Xingyu could no longer bear it. She opened her mouth and spat out a palm-sized star shuttle. As soon as the star shuttle appeared, it immediately emitted bright starlight. Countless heaven and earth yuan qi rushed into it like a gust of wind. Fairy Xingyu formed a seal with one hand. This seal was so obscure that even someone as strong as Xiao Hua could not understand it. When Fairy Xingyu's hand glowed with moonlight that resembled fireflies, she raised her hand and waved it. The moonlight fell into the star shuttle. Whoosh! The star shuttle was transparent and rushed into the sky. Whoosh! The star shuttle landed in the space mezzanine in front of Xiao Hua and immediately exploded, turning into a starry sky that was thousands of miles in size. There were many stars twinkling in the starry sky. Each star corresponded to a shadow of a palace door within this 1,000 miles. Penetrate! Fairy Xingyu shouted softly. Every star extended a pillar of stars and shot into the space mezzanine. It seemed that Fairy Xingyu wanted to break through the space mezzanine by force. The pillar of starlight shot into the spatial mezzanine. Similar to the great demon from before, it expanded abruptly. However, after charging a few li, the pillar of starlight showed signs of dissipating. Moreover, the pillar of starlight started to bend, and its entire trajectory condensed into a knot of light. Disregarding the fact that the knot of light was intermittent, whether Xiao Hua and the others could safely reach the correct palace door phantom after charging through the pillar of starlight. Based on the fact that the pillar of starlight had turned into stardust after charging a few more li, Xiao Hua understood that given Immortal Xingyu's methods, she probably wouldn't be able to find the true palace door phantom. Shuji, give me a hand. Fairy Xingyu shouted, unwilling to admit defeat. I don't believe it. Chapter 4503. Even if I can help you, I'm afraid we don't have enough time. Shuji's face also showed disappointment as he replied bitterly, "It will take too long for your star shuttle to rush into the spatial mezzanine. I'm afraid we won't be able to find the real palace door. The palace door of the Star Moon Palace has already closed." What? Xiao Hua was shocked again. How long will the palace door of the Star Moon Palace last? Why didn't you say so earlier? Shuji did not explain to him. He only said, 2 hours at most, half an hour at least. Oh, there's still time. Xiao Hua nodded and asked again, "If this junior can find the general area, senior will be able to activate the star shuttle, right?" You can determine the general area?" Fairy Xing Yu was overjoyed. "This junior will try." Xiao Hua nodded. "However, this junior can't guarantee it." Xiao Hua, you are indeed our savior." Fairy Xing Yu shouted, "Shuji, your divination technique is really accurate. Seniors, get ready." Xiao Hua said in a low voice as he looked around. On the entire Crimson Ground River, tens of thousands of humans and demons were watching the three of them perform a one-man show. By the way, senior, you can also ask the 4 great families and the great demons to think of a way. We can't always be the vanguard. Xiao Hua thought of a way to distract them and whispered to Fairy Xing Yu. Fairy Xing Yu nodded and said, "Yes, they used to follow Zhai Xing Lu and drink soup. Now, let them do something." After saying that, Fairy Xing Yu flew up into the sky and sent a voice transmission to the 4 great families, the Confucian cultivators, and the great demons of the demon clan. Xiao Hua nodded at Shuji and the two of them flew closer to the spatial mezzanine. Shuji waved his hand and the exploded star shuttle was restored. The dim starlight fell into his hand. Xiao Hua stopped and turned his head to look. Under Fairy Xing Yu's voice transmission, the 4 great families and the Confucian cultivators were also a little flustered. They gathered together to discuss, while the great demons of the demon clan rushed into the mezzanine one after another. They each found a direction and activated their innate divine abilities, trying to find the real palace door. "Senior," Xiao Hua whispered, "please protect this junior. I don't want others to see my divine abilities." "All right." Without another word, Shuji raised his arms high into the sky and spread his 5 fingers. Like a peacock spreading its tail, lightning immediately enveloped the surrounding hundreds of miles. Inside the thunder, Xiao Hua slapped his forehead. A ghostly green light flashed and the delusion breaker eye slowly opened. Hiss! Xiao Hua couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air when he saw everything through the illusion breaker eye. In front of Xiao Hua's eyes was an incomparably huge golden color. This golden color made Xiao Hua's delirium transcendence eye sour. Within the golden light, an irregular orange hole that looked like a hole was slowly moving. The orange hole radiated a tricolored flow. This flow was like a spring rushing into a grayish-black flowing wave. The flowing wave was shaking violently. Clusters of green and silver flashed constantly. The tricolored flow created a faintly discernible passageway in the flowing wave, and then dissipated within the flowing wave. "Over there," Xiao Hua whispered to Shuji. However, the illusory image of the palace door is changing from time to time. "All right." Shuji's face was still calm as he replied via voice transmission, "As long as you can roughly determine the range." After saying that, Shuji turned around and sent a voice transmission to Fairy Xing Yu. Fairy Xing Yu was currently saying something to the Shimon family. She did not expect Xiao Hua to be able to determine the location in such a short period of time. Therefore, without another word, she immediately teleported to Xiao Hua's side. Fairy Xing Yu's actions naturally attracted the attention of the 4 great families. While they were discussing, they were also watching the movements of Xiao Hua and the others. Shuji sent a voice transmission to Fairy Xing Yu. The two of them exchanged opinions and then led Xiao Hua to the location of the illusory image of the palace door. At this moment, some great demons of the demon clan had already begun to force their way into the spatial mezzanine. There were also some Confucian families and heavenly kings of the Buddhist sect who had made preparations. They activated their imperial equipment or heavenly eyes to explore the spatial mezzanine. They saw the illusory image of the palace door. At this time, because the Star Moon Palace had moved again, There were already more than 10,000 illusory images of the palace door within 100 miles. Xiao Hua thought for a moment and said, Senior Shu, please continue to protect me. I will activate my divine ability first. After I have some clues, can you activate your magic treasure? No need. Shuji shook his head and said, save your magic power first. There are still places in the Star Moon Palace that need your help. Here, according to our previous discussion, Fairy Xingyu and I will take action. Yes, Shuji is right. Fairy Xingyu also nodded and said, there are many places that rely on the power of thunder. It's better for you to save your strength. With that, Fairy Xingyu nodded at Shuji and said, you go first. I will activate it later. Let's find the right palace door first. Xiao Hua hurriedly sent a voice transmission, Fairy, just follow the direction I know. There's no need to search anymore. What? This time, even Shuji was shocked. Your divine ability can actually see through the space that is close to chaos? It seems like it. Xiao Hua nodded. Seeing that a few heavenly kings from the Buddhist sect were also coming over, he said, let's hurry up and take action. Otherwise, the Buddhist sect will take the lead. All right. Shuji nodded. He raised his hand and took out a broken beast-shaped jade piece. The beast shape looked similar to the lunar beast in the Bright Moon Palace. However, it was broken and one could not see its full appearance. Shuji opened his mouth and a water-blue thunderbolt fell into the jade piece. The entire jade piece emitted a blue brilliance. Boom! The moonlight that had originally fallen into the Star Moon Palace split into a pillar of moonlight and fell into the jade piece. Then, a broken outline of the lunar beast appeared in front of Xiao Hua. It is indeed the lunar beast. Xiao Hua understood. Shuji explained, this is an ancient relic I obtained when I was patrolling the borders of a forbidden area. I don't know its specific power, but I can barely activate the moonlight within it. Xingyue, come and lend me a hand. Once Xiao Hua confirms the correct phantom image of the palace door, we will connect this pillar of starlight to that phantom image. If that's the case, Fairy Xingyu bit her lip and said softly, won't the people from the 4 aristocratic families take advantage of us again? The Star Moon Palace was meant for them to take advantage of us. Shuji scolded without holding back. Furthermore, at this point, why are you still thinking about this? There. Since he was not afraid of others taking advantage of them, Xiao Hua did not hide it anymore. He raised his hand and pointed at the spot where the tricolored brilliance had disappeared. Fairy Xingyu looked over. Indeed, there were several palace door shadows at the place where Xiao Hua had pointed. Fairy Xingyu's face turned solemn. She slowly formed a seal with both hands. Layers of mist-like brilliance appeared in the surrounding void. When a low rumbling sound was heard, Fairy Xingyu raised her hand again. It was as if she was holding a heavy object in her hand. Then, she slowly dropped it toward the lunar beast's shadow. Squeak! The lunar beast's shadow made a sound that Xiao Hua was familiar with. Then, the shadow started to solidify. Shuji did not dare to delay. He opened his mouth and a mouthful of blood essence mixed with silver light fell into the lunar beast's brilliance. Then, he pushed the blood essence along Xiao Hua's moving finger. Boom! The lunar beast immediately moved and rushed into the interlayer of space. In the chaotic interlayer of space, the lunar beast's body could not help but spread out. However, there was a swaying tail behind it. The starlight in the tail was so bright that it dispersed the chaotic aura. Let's go. When Xiao Hua saw the passageway appear, he hurriedly urged his body to rush in. However, Shuji said in surprise, don't be hasty. The palace door shadow has appeared before. Senior. Xiao Hua smiled and said, the palace door shadow is just a facade. When Shuji heard this, he could not help but laugh. Then, he held his forehead and said, I have fallen into a habitual mindset. Habitual mindset? Xiao Hua did not understand what Shuji meant. However, before he could ask further, Shuji turned his head and said, Xingyu, follow behind me. Xiao Hua, you, stay at the back and protect me. Yes, senior. Xiao Hua nodded. Shuji stood up, and layers of strange markings appeared on his body. These markings rushed into the air and turned into tadpole-like runes, and when the runes flashed, a layer of dragon scale-like armor appeared around Shuji's body. There were many lightning runes on this armor, and an indescribable aura was emitted from the armor. Looking at Fairy Xingyu, the marks also fell off her body and arms. A layer of soft armor that was engraved with many mysterious runes was also revealed. This soft armor was covered in starlight. Whoosh! Shuji's body swayed and a thunderbolt crashed into the star mark. He chased after the moon beast. Fairy Xingyu turned her head and looked at Xiao Hua. She was a little surprised that Xiao Hua did not take out any Dharma treasure or armor to protect himself. However, she did not have time to say more. She only nodded and signaled Xiao Hua to be careful. Then, she turned into a ray of starlight and chased after him. The two immortals flew into the passageway and immediately emitted strange lights and shadows. The lights and shadows seemed to be extremely long and wide at the same time. An aura was emitted from the passageway like a tidal wave. Xiao Hua took a deep breath and activated the vital energy in his body. Buzz, buzz. Countless sword heads appeared on the surface of his body. When he turned into a sword, Xiao Hua also flashed and rushed into the passageway. Quick! The actions of the three naturally attracted the attention of the Confucian cultivators from the four aristocratic families. Dongfang Yushan waved his hand without hesitation and said, according to the agreement with Zhai Xinglu, let's go in. Yes. The disciples of the Dongfang family responded happily. They formed a group and flew toward the Chidi River. The starry sky passageway, which was dozens of feet wide, became bigger and expanded in all directions. Before the disciples of the Dongfang family arrived, the Buddhist sect's guardians, who had been paying attention to Xiao Hua and the others, had already arrived. They also activated their bodies without hesitation and entered the passageway. P.S. Fellow Taoists who like this book, please come to Chidian to vote, recommend, bookmark, and donate. Thank you for all your support. Chapter 4505. Damn it! Dongfang Yushan cursed under his breath. The four aristocratic families followed behind Zhai Xinglu, which was a form of order and a form of respect. Now that the Buddhist sect had broken it, the Dongfang family felt as if they had lost all face. However, Dongfang Yushan only cursed once before his gaze fell on the spatial mezzanine again. Within the spatial mezzanine, a streak of lightning, a streak of starlight, and a streak of sword light formed a knot-like trajectory within the spatial mezzanine. They were already nearing the shadow of one of the palace doors. Go! Dongfang Yushan was just about to raise his hand to give the order when suddenly, an unfamiliar face emerged from the crowd of Confucian cultivators in the distance. A black and white halo appeared around the unfamiliar cultivator as he instantly passed by Dongfang Yushan's side and charged straight into the passageway. Chimpage! Seeing the cultivator's figure pass by him, Dongfang Yushan snorted coldly and raised his hand slightly. Boom! A pillar of qi condensed into a chain and wrapped around the light figure. Little child! An old, cold-blooded voice suddenly sounded in Dongfang Yushan's ears. Don't be nosy. I don't want to make things difficult for the four aristocratic families today. As he spoke, a streak of black and white brilliance fell between the chains. That brilliance was like a key and the entire chain collapsed in the blink of an eye. At the place where the brilliance landed, the fluctuations of a Tao sect spell arrogantly spread in all directions. Grand Mist Ancestor. Dongfang Yushan was shocked and screamed wildly in his heart. Why is he here at Xingyue Palace? While Dongfang Yushan was still in shock, the Grand Mist Ancestor had already charged into the passageway, transforming into a black and white brilliance as he charged towards the shadow of the palace doors. Quick, 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 don't delay. Although Dongfang Yushan was intimidated by the Grand Mist Ancestor, he knew that this old monster was definitely not someone he could deal with. Since the Grand Mist Ancestor did not want to create unnecessary trouble, he must have entered Xingyue Palace for something important. There was no need for him to find trouble with the Grand Mist Ancestor. He hurriedly urged his disciples. This time is different from the past. Although the Zhai Xinglu disciples did not take up too much time, we still might not have enough time. Following the entrance of the Dongfang family, more and more great demons of the demon clan noticed this place. They followed suit and gave up on their own efforts to pounce on this place. The lunar beast that was formed from the jade piece dashed into the void. As it went deeper into the void, its body became fainter and fainter. Shuji was following behind the lunar beast. Seeing the shadow appearing again, he started to panic. At this moment, he was already in a hopeless situation, and he could only fight for survival while facing death. There was absolutely no room for retreat. As a result, a ball of blue lightning began to brew between Shuji's eyebrows. Shuji's worries were not unfounded. Although the ancient jade piece could break through the layers of space, when it was only a few feet away from the shadow of the palace door, the entire shadow of the lunar beast was reduced to a faint line. Chirp, chirp. The lunar beast let out a few low cries, and the line turned into nothingness. A jade piece that had lost its luster fell from the sky. Before Shuji could catch it, the jade piece had already turned into powder and disappeared. Shuji did not have time to think. He turned his hand and tapped the space between his eyebrows. Catcher! A huge thunderbolt condensed into a lightning pillar and struck forward. When the lightning pillar landed in the chaotic void, it immediately became bony and became as thick as a thumb. The horned dragon from before had now become an earthworm, and it struggled to drill into the shadow of the palace door. Although Shuji was an immortal, his physical body was not that of an immortal. Similarly, he was not as strong as the great demon of the demon clan from before. Shuji did not dare to take the risk himself and could only wait for the lightning pillar to pass through the void. Shuji, move aside. Behind Shuji, Fairy Xingyu's delicate voice chased after him. A beam of starlight shot out from Fairy Xingyu's eyes, went past Shuji, and pounced on the void that was destroyed by the lightning pillar. Roar, roar, roar. The lightning pillar wrapped around the starlight and sped up. In just a few breaths, it had landed on the moving shadow of the palace door. Woo! Where the starlight landed, the shadow of the palace door stopped moving. The waves on it immediately passed through and rushed into the starlight corridor. Shuji felt his vision blur, and layers of untainted land were once again introduced into his mind. Phew! Shuji let out a long sigh. This strange situation was exactly what he had seen when he had rushed into the illusory shadow of the palace door. At this point, all the changes had been overcome. Things had returned to the original track that he and Fairy Xingyu had planned. Let's go. Shuji raised his hand and waved. The star shuttle in his hand rushed into the shadow of the palace door like a meteor. His body was still like a thunderbolt, following the star shuttle closely. Shuji had gone. Fairy Xingyu was delighted. She turned to look at Xiao Hua, who was following behind her, and could not help but feel emotional. If Xiao Hua had not found the correct shadow of the palace door and urged him, even if Shuji had used the ancient jade slip, it would have been impossible for him to connect the shadow of the palace door to the starlight corridor in time. Be careful. There may be chaotic storms ahead. Fairy Xingyu reminded him and sped up, following behind Shuji. Xiao Hua nodded. With a flash of sword light, he also entered the shadow of the palace door. Behind Xiao Hua, the waves of starlight that were as brilliant as fireworks rushed all the way to the edge of the spatial mezzanine. Boom! The moment the shockwave rushed out, a huge protruding star mark appeared in the night sky above the Crimson River. This star mark was several miles in size and had many folds of light, just like a huge palace gate. Let's go. At this time, the disciples of the Dongfang family had already entered. The disciples of the Shimen family, the Nangong family, and the Beiming family were preparing. When they saw the expected door appear, they did not wait any longer. They each chose a direction and entered at the same time. The four great clans had just entered the passageway when the Star Moon Palace moved again. However, this time, there was a link at the palace door that was connected to the Thousand Demons' sacred realm. When the Star Moon Palace moved, the passageway that was condensed from starlight also moved. The passageway was also pulled by the almost chaotic interlayer of space. Although it moved, the aura in the chaotic space rushed into the starlight passage through the gaps in the starlight again. Whoosh! Like a real storm, the chaotic aura rushed out from all parts of the passage without any pattern. Shuji and Fairy Xingyu were already experienced. When they saw that the starlight passage was somewhat entangled, they immediately became vigilant. As they released their divine senses, they immediately dodged when they sensed signs of a storm. As for Xiao Hua, his flying technique was not inferior to Shu Ji's and Fairy Xingyu's, so he was even more sensitive to approaching danger. In particular, when the chaotic aura passed through the starlight passage, Xiao Hua instantly felt a sense of familiarity. Even if he did not use his divine senses, he could still dodge in time. Some distance behind Xiao Hua were the Buddhist protectors who had rushed in first. They weren't as relaxed as Xiao Hua and company. Seeing the chaos storm suddenly descend, the two sons of Buddha didn't have time to dodge. The chaos aura landed on their bodies. Boom, boom, boom. Their bodies suddenly expanded. Before they could react, their flesh and blood had already exploded, turning into dust and vanishing without a trace. The other Buddhist protectors who were lucky enough to dodge did not dare to be negligent. They did their best to activate their Buddhist clouds and rushed into the distance. After the Buddhist protectors, it was naturally the unfamiliar Daoist cultivator. At this time, the Daoist cultivator's forehead was filled with two colors, black and white. The black and white colors condensed into fine lines that connected the cultivator's two eyes. The left eye of the cultivator seemed to have no pupils and was only pure white. The right eye of the cultivator was completely filled with pupils and was only pure black. The cultivator's eyes were expressionless in the blink of an eye. However, when the cultivator flew past the chaotic storm, he looked at the light in the distance and said in the voice of the Grand Mist Ancestor, "This Daoist cultivator is indeed Xiao Hua. When did he become so powerful? He's a human Mahayana realm cultivator. Back then, this old man's cultivation was only at this level. How could he have cultivated to such a level in just a few hundred years? If he had such a cultivation level, how could he be suppressed in the 1,000 demons sacred realm? Right now, all the Confucian cultivators in the 100 schools of philosophers are talking about the profound yellow board, the Fortune Gate disciples, and the Grand Ascension stage human who streaked across the sky like a meteor. But who can tell me where he came from?" The Grand Mist Ancestor was almost muttering to himself, "Based on the clues we have now, he was the first to appear when I escaped." However, at that time, he was at the eye of the West Sea. Later, he appeared in the Yu Province's Longevity Town. If I'm not mistaken, he must have arrived at the Longevity Town through the eye of the West Sea. Damn it, this bastard's luck is too good. There are so many spatial veins, and only a few people can come out alive. He just happened to be able to enter one of them. Sigh, if I had known that this Xiao Hua was so mysterious, I would have brought him out back then. The Grand Mist Ancestor was already regretting his decision. If I had subdued him back then, wouldn't he be my powerful right-hand man now? But now, I've already offended him, and this enmity is not easy to mend. After that, I even let Daoist Master Qing Shu and Master Heaven Flipping covet his forces in the Soaring Dragon Mountain range. I don't even know if he's discovered it now. Of course, it was only for an instant, and the Grand Mist Ancestor said coldly, "So what if we fall out?" Right now, the 3 continents are in turmoil, and heroes are emerging in large numbers. There are as many heroes as there are hairs on an ox in this chaotic world, but there is only one true emperor. With the Yin-Yang Illustrated Handbook, it's only a matter of time before I recover to the peak of the Grand Ascension stage. Let me ask you, who in this world can be my opponent? Xiao Hua is nothing more than a helper sent by the heavens to assist this old man in achieving hegemony. If he is tamed, then this old man doesn't mind giving him some benefits. If he is unruly, then this old man also doesn't mind personally eliminating him. The so-called Fortune Gate is merely a gift given to this old man by the heavens. Chapter 4506. Ha ha ha. The Grand Mist Ancestor couldn't help but laugh at the thought of this. Black and white clouds rose around him and wrapped around his body as he charged toward the end of the starlight. However, the black-white cloud merely flew a few jong away. Swoosh. Another chaos storm came crashing down. The Grand Mist Ancestor was so pleased with himself that a corner of the black-white cloud was swept away by the chaos storm. The black-white cloud was like a bubble in the chaos storm, and it was blown away in an instant. The Grand Mist Ancestor's figure was revealed, but one of his legs was missing. Damn it! The Grand Mist Ancestor hurriedly retreated. His pair of black and white eyes stared ahead as he felt a little vexed. Why do I feel so impatient? It's better to be careful. Xiao Hua is a human Grand Ascension stage cultivator, so there's nothing to fear. However, the Star Moon Lord is a mysterious figure who can't be underestimated. Moreover, who is that cultivator beside the Star Moon Lord? It seems that even Xiao Hua has to treat him with respect. Could he be a Grand Ascension stage cultivator as well? That's impossible. How could there be so many Grand Ascension stage cultivators in my absence? Sigh, could it be him? Thinking of this, the Grand Mist Ancestor hurriedly withdrew the black and white fog, revealing his body. His previous arrogance disappeared without a trace, and his black and white eyes revealed a strange expression as he stared at the distant starlight. He pondered, how could I forget about him? However, with his lifespan and strength, it's impossible for him to undergo tribulation. He should have died tens of thousands of years ago. Of course, I can't rule out the possibility that he had some fortuitous encounter that allowed him to preserve his primordial spirit and become undying like me. If it's him, I have to be careful. His abilities are strange and he has countless tricks up his sleeves. I owe him a debt of gratitude for his guidance. Perhaps I should treat him with respect. Me? What respect? If it's really him, then this old man should ask him why he didn't save this old man when he was clearly alive and saw this old man being suppressed in the eye of the West Sea. Why didn't he save me when he knew that I was being suppressed by the combined forces of the immortals, Buddhas, and demons? As a senior of the Tao Gate, he doesn't have the slightest awareness of a senior. He doesn't even care about the Tao Gate's disciples. What right does he have to be a senior of the Tao Gate? If this old man sees him, I'm going to question him in person. The more the Grand Mist Ancestor thought about it, the angrier he got. He had long forgotten about the him who had taught him, and the righteousness of reviving Taoism was on his lips. However, even if that was what the Grand Mist Ancestor thought, he didn't dare to question Shuji. If Shuji was really him, the Grand Mist Ancestor understood that Shuji's divine ability could be withstood by those around him. The Grand Mist Ancestor wouldn't dare to appear in front of Shuji. Therefore, even though the Grand Mist Ancestor had sensed the Dongfang family's disciples chasing after him, he did not dare to rush towards the Star Moon Palace. Even Shuji and the others didn't dare to underestimate the power of the Chaos Storm. Even the Grand Mist Ancestor wasn't spared, not to mention the other cultivators. Most of the disciples of the four great clans who had rushed in first were caught off guard when they saw the chaotic windstorm falling. The lucky ones naturally saw the windstorm brushing past them and broke out in a cold sweat. The unlucky ones could only watch as the windstorm fell. Not to mention their physical bodies being destroyed and their bones turning into powder, even the sub-bodies that had been brewing for a long time were destroyed by the windstorm. They first turned into vital energy, then merged with the chaotic aura and turned into nothingness. Naturally, there were some Confucian cultivators who weren't willing to die. Most of them had imperial weapons in their hands or on them. Their tone wasn't inferior to the Immortal Palace's imperial weapons. However, as the chaos storm brushed past, any imperial weapon lost its luster and any material turned into scrap metal. In the time it took to brew a cup of tea, 20% of the disciples of the four great families had already fallen. Change formation and advance. Dongfang Yushan saw that the situation in the Starlight Passage was more dangerous than he had expected. He didn't dare to delay and hurriedly transmitted his orders. Unfortunately, within the Starlight Passage, his strength of a mere 7th-level origin power martial grandmaster wasn't enough. No one could hear him. Dongfang Yushan had no choice but to shout at the top of his lungs. Fortunately, the Dongfang family's foundation was rare in the hidden immortal continent. The disciples who were selected to enter the Star Moon Palace were mostly elites of the human race. They still had the ability to remain calm in the face of danger. When they heard Dongfang Yushan's orders, they immediately stabilized and hurriedly changed their formation. In a scattered star formation, they advanced inwards. If the Dongfang family could do this, the Shiman family, Nangong family, and Beiming family could do the same. The four great families occupied the entire Starlight Passage and rushed towards the Star-Moon Palace. Compared to the four great families, the Confucian cultivators of the 100 schools of philosophers were slightly inferior. However, the human race was strong in unity and order. Although nearly 30% of the disciples had fallen in the chaos storm, they still stubbornly advanced towards the Star-Moon Palace. Compared to the human race, the great demons of the demon race were far inferior. They also had some allies, but not many. When they saw the door of the Star-Moon Palace appear and the human race begin to enter in an orderly manner, they became anxious and swarmed towards the door. The more impatient ones had already bypassed the human cultivators and subconsciously flew in among them. The more meticulous ones waited for the human race to finish entering before finding some great demons to enter with them. Of course, this disorder had its advantages and disadvantages. The advantage was that the chaos storm fell. Due to the disorder of the great demons, they were scattered all over the passage and the chances of being hit by the chaos storm were not very high. However, it was also this disorder that slowed down the speed of entering the passage. Not long after, the Star-Moon Palace moved again and the chaos storm fell again. There were no surprises at all. Under the aura of chaos, the great demons of the demon race first emitted dazzling starlight and their bodies rapidly expanded. Then, without waiting for their bodies to come into contact with the Starlight Passage, boom! Every bit of flesh and blood in the great demons' bodies exploded. This exploded flesh and blood separated from the starlight and immediately turned into nothingness. Go, go, go! The great demons of the demon race were all terrified. They scrambled to fly towards the Star-Moon Palace with all their might. It was inevitable that the passage would be somewhat chaotic. However, it was fortunate that this was not the first time that the Confucian cultivator clans had entered. They were already prepared and gave up part of the space to avoid the great demons. After a full hour, there were no longer any traces of humans or demons on the Crimson Earth River. Although the moon and stars were still bright, and the night wind was blowing, the endless loneliness was still spreading in all directions, even more endlessly than the aura of primordial times. At this moment, the area of 100,000 miles around the Star-Moon Palace was filled with endless whirlpools of wind blades. Although the appearance of the Star-Moon Palace only triggered the aura of chaos within 1,000 miles, the changes in heaven and earth caused by the Star-Moon Palace were not limited to this. Although the wind blades formed small whirlpools, there was a huge whirlpool that surrounded the entire Star-Moon Palace. Xiao Hua and the others were inside the whirlpool and could not sense it. However, the demon race inside the whirlpool could sense that even if they released their primordial thoughts could not come within 100,000 miles. Even immortal Emperor Go Chen's supreme heavenly mirror and Mahavairokkana revered world's divine ability could not see what was happening within 100,000 miles. Although Xiao Hua did not know that so many things were happening in the passageway behind him, he could guess with his heels. Although he was flying at the front, he had encountered more than a dozen chaotic storms within the Starlight Passage, and had even narrowly crashed into them several times. As such, he was well aware of the tragic fate of the Confucian cultivators behind him. Xiao Hua saw the brilliance of the stars and the moon, which was even larger than a mountain, filling the entire passageway. In the brilliance of the stars and the moon, there was even a protruding light pillar that was about to split the heavens and the earth. Xiao Hua understood that this was most likely the real door to the Star-Moon Palace. Xu Ji and Fairy Xing Yu had already flown down to the light pillar. Both of them were wearing armor and had solemn expressions. Xu Ji urged his body to slowly fly above the light pillar, as if he was checking the situation of the palace door. Fairy Xing Yu, on the other hand, had a puzzled look on her face as she watched Xiao Hua fly over. "You actually know the swordsmanship of the Confucian cultivators?" Fairy Xing Yu asked directly. "And you've even reached the sword transformation realm?" Xiao Hua said faintly, "Didn't I tell you before? In the Dawn Rain continent, there is a group of sword cultivators who specialize in swordsmanship. I have obtained their secret technique, so I can transform into a sword." "Even if you can transform into a sword?" Fairy Xing Yu shook her head again. The body of the human clan is absolutely no match for magic treasures and armor. I don't understand why you don't wear armor to protect yourself. Don't tell me that you don't have armor in your Chenkuan bag. Fairy Xingyu is right. I really don't have a suitable armor, Xiao Hua said with a smile, as if he had no intention of hiding it. Humph, you're lying to me. Who would believe you? Fairy Xingyu could only snort coldly. She was really helpless against Xiao Hua, who was stubborn. Xiao Hua shrugged and smiled bitterly. I'm right. I don't know whether others believe it or not. Anyway, I don't believe anything you say. Fairy Xingyu said decisively. Xiao Hua did not expect Fairy Xingyu to believe him. He looked at the light pillar and asked, "Why aren't you going in? Are you waiting for an opportunity?" Yes. Fairy Xingyu nodded. The Star Moon Palace is an ancient divine object. With our cultivation, we can't go in easily. We have to wait until the Star Moon Palace moves. Xingyu. Shuji's figure suddenly landed and he said anxiously, "The Star Moon Palace seems to be moving. Let's get out of the way first." Okay. Fairy Xingyu did not dare to be negligent. She hurriedly followed Shuji and flashed to the side of the light pillar. Xiao Hua naturally followed behind. As soon as the three of them stood still, the brilliance of the stars and the moon that filled the world began to vibrate slightly. Then, the aura that was as vast as the sea let out a low roar. The protruding light pillar began to flow with mysterious fine lines from top to bottom. The fine lines were extremely strange and exuded an unapproachable majesty. When the fine lines fell to the bottom of the light pillar, the entire light pillar swelled toward the passage like a bubble. Puff! The light pillar turned into an aura and rushed out, revealing a starry sky under the brilliance. Chapter 4507. Let's go! Shuji shouted, obviously reminding Xiao Hua that Fairy Xingyu's figure had already flashed into the starry sky. Entering the Star Moon Palace was not too troublesome. Xiao Hua only felt a strong primitive aura coming from all over the starry sky, making his mouth and nose feel very comfortable. Phew! Standing in the starry sky, Shuji looked at the huge convex starry door behind him and the mottled light and shadow outside the starry door. He let out a long sigh and said, "Entering the Star Moon Palace has never been as difficult as this time." Yes. Fairy Xingyu looked at the void under her feet and the picturesque stars and moons around her and said, "Maybe it was too easy before and we didn't gain anything. Today's difficulty is the only way we can find the real passage." What was it like before? Xiao Hua asked tentatively. In fact, Xiao Hua had wanted to ask this question for a long time. However, seeing that Shuji and Fairy Xingyu were unwilling to say more, Xiao Hua understood that although the two immortals trusted him, they were still somewhat guarded against him. After all, they had been taught a lesson before him. Now, they only knew about the primordial chaos ancestor. Who knew what the primordial chaos ancestor was like before? Therefore, Xiao Hua never asked too much about things that they did not want to say because he had a lot of things that he had not told them. It wasn't so complicated in the past. Shuji replied faintly, "Before we came in, there were many illusory doors. We only needed to find the right one, activate the spirit shuttle, and let the spirit shuttle find the right passage. At that time, there were sometimes chaotic storms in the Starlight Passage, but not many. We were the first to come in and have encountered them more than 10 times. Based on our previous experience, 3 times is enough." Fairy Xingyu looked at the mottled starry door and gloated. This time, the 4 aristocratic families and the Confucian cultivators are unlucky. I'm afraid they will lose 50% of their disciples. In the past, only 10% of the great demons of the demon clan would die. This time, it will probably reach 30%. Shuji nodded. After all, the chaotic storms have multiplied several times. Although their demon bodies are strong, under the chaotic aura, their demon bodies are like ant. Primordial chaos seems to be here. Fairy Xingyu thought for a while and finally reminded Shuji. Shuji's face sank as he nodded. Yes, I've already sensed his aura. Although his strength is not as strong as when he was at his peak, he has already refined the yin-yang illustration mirror and entrusted his primordial spirit to it. His divine powers are even stronger than before. Fairy Xingyu said again. Not bad. Shuji turned his head to look at the huge stargate and said, after refining the yin-yang illustration book, he has the preliminary ability to reverse yin and yang. Moreover, he also used the power of the yin-yang illustration book to forcibly occupy the body of a Taoist cultivator. If there is no special magic, it is very difficult to recognize him. Unfortunately, a dog can't change its habit of eating shit. Some people would never do something in their lifetime, but some people would do it with a wave of their hand. Some people would rather die than think about something, but some people would take it for granted. F***CK. Fairy Xingyu glared at Shuji with dissatisfaction and said, Aren't you saying that I'm waiting for myself? That's right. Shuji nodded solemnly. In this aspect, we can't compare to Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua was extremely embarrassed. He waved his hand and said, Senior, you think too highly of me. In a life and death situation, I will also take over someone else's body. You won't. Shuji seemed to be more certain than Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua smiled bitterly and touched his nose. Senior seems to understand me better than I do. Because a cultivator like you is the darling of the heavenly Tao. How could the heavenly Tao bear to test you with such a cruel choice? Shuji answered calmly, without any hint of jealousy in his voice. Senior, you're flattering me. Xiao Hua disagreed. However, when he saw that Shuji and Fairy Xingyu were not in a hurry to move forward, as if they were waiting for something, he asked again, By the way, why is the Hongmeng ancestor here? Does he also need to come to the Star Moon Palace to comprehend? I don't know either. Shuji shook his head. Hongmeng is the most scheming. He came to the Star Moon Palace in his early years and disappeared from our sight. However, after he left the Star Moon Palace, he did not mention a word about what he saw in the Star Moon Palace. I have never interrogated him about this. He must have encountered something in the Star Moon Palace last time. This time, he wants to go and take a look. Hehe, isn't that just right? Xiao Hua chuckled. Let's wait here and stop him first and interrogate him. Moreover, Xiao Hua originally wanted to say that he also had a grudge with the Hongmeng ancestor and wanted to ask about it. However, Shuji shook his head and said, Everyone has their own ambitions. Why force him? Moreover, Hongmeng's ambition is too big. He will burn himself sooner or later. Why should we be nosy? Looking at Fairy Xingyue's pursed lips, Xiao Hua nodded inwardly. He gave Shuji a thumbs up in his heart. Only such a magnanimous cultivator was worthy of being an immortal. Only such a broad-minded immortal was worthy of being a law enforcer. Xiao Hua admitted that it was difficult for him to pardon someone who had harmed him. Let's go. Shuji originally wanted to wait a little longer. However, when he heard Xiao Hua mention killing the Hongmeng ancestor, he did not want to wait any longer. He called out and rushed into the starry sky. Let's go. Fairy Xingyu was obviously like Xiao Hua. She wanted to make a fool out of the Hongmeng ancestor. However, she was helpless now. She shrugged and said, Let's go through the meteor belt first. However, speaking of which, isn't it a little early to go through the meteor belt? Shuji did not answer Fairy Xingyu. Fairy Xingyu chased after him resentfully. Xiao Hua also looked thoughtfully at the huge stargate and urged his body to follow the two immortals. The inside of the Star Moon Palace was incomparably huge and there were no restrictions that restricted divine sense. Xiao Hua tried to release his divine sense, but he could not reach the end of the Star Moon Palace. Moreover, the space of the Star Moon Palace was very strange. It was different from the three continents, the ruins, and the primitive continent. Xiao Hua had already tried, but he could not sense the Shenhua continent. Needless to say, the Kunlun mirror could not be used either. More importantly, Xiao Hua vaguely felt that the power of laws that imprisoned him on the three continents had somewhat disappeared. The power of the two immortals flying in front of him had quietly changed. Perhaps they had already broken free from the shackles of the ninth-grade essence force. It's worthy of being an ancient divine object. Xiao Hua could not help but sigh. The Star Moon Palace seems to have formed a world of its own. Even the laws are different. No wonder the space and the Kunlun mirror cannot be used. Only a divine object like this has a passageway to the immortal world. After Xiao Hua and the others left, a stream of light flashed above the stargate. First, a bald head poked in and then looked around. Then, a fat figure squeezed in. This Buddhist sect guardian looked very ordinary, but one of his eyes was black and the other white. The Buddhist sect guardian jumped into the starry sky and his fat body jumped a few times on the spot. He looked around blankly and then muttered to himself, "So, the Star Moon Palace is like this. Hey! Where's the Star Moon Master who came in earlier? Where are the two Dao sect cultivators?" After a while, there was no response from the silent starry sky. Only then did the Buddhist sect guardian smile. Looking at the place where Xiao Hua and the others had disappeared, the voice of the primordial chaos ancestor sounded from the guardian's mouth again. "Hihi, so they left long ago. Looks like that cultivator was not him. Mph, even if it was him, so what? The Yin-Yang Illustrated Handbook reverses yin and yang. Without the strength of an immortal, how could he discover the secret of the Yin-Yang Illustrated Handbook? Even if he stood in front of me now, he would not be able to discover my background. Ha ha ha, ha ha ha." With that said, the Grand Mist ancestor also flew in the direction Shu Zhifei had gone. However, beneath the Buddhist sect's protector's body, there were still Buddhist clouds beneath his feet. Even though there were faint traces of black and white clouds within the Buddhist clouds, Huang Xiaolong could still see them. One had to admit that the primordial chaos ancestor was a rare prodigy of the Tao. He fought against the immortals, Buddhas, and demons by himself. Of course, he was defeated in the end. However, even the Vairocana revered sovereign, immortal Emperor Go Chen, and the golden-winged Peng couldn't truly destroy him. They could only suppress him in the eye of the Western Sea. Moreover, he even managed to refine the yin-yang diagram that was suppressing him. Although he had just escaped and did not have much magic power, he was like a flood dragon entering the sea. Immortal Emperor Go Chen and the Vairocana revered sage were unable to find him. After the Grand Mist ancestor left, no other Buddhist sect's enforcers came in. After the time it takes to brew a cup of tea, flashes of starlight flickered, and the four families' disciples rushed into the hall in a fluster. Of course, when everyone landed in the starry sky, they calmed down in a moment. There was no need for anyone to say anything. They stood in the starry sky and waited for the leaders of their respective clans to come in. Dongfang Yushan, Shimen Hengyue, Nangong Pingping, and Beiming Qihan were the last to come in. They did not look at the surrounding starry sky, but at their respective disciples. Although they had expected it, when they saw the number of people in the group, their faces were still a little pale. Dongfang Yushan looked at Shimen Hengyue and the other two and sighed. "Brothers, our task this time is considered a failure. Our Dongfang family has lost almost half of our disciples. I presume that the rest of you are about the same, right?" "Yes," Nangong Pingping said. "I have already heard from my brother's introduction. According to them, entering the Star Moon Palace was not a big deal. Even if our luck was bad, it was impossible to lose 10% of our disciples. Now, it is actually half. I don't know how to explain it when I return to the clan." Shimen Hengyue glanced at Dongfang Yushan and said, "Brother Dongfang must have some plans. I won't hide it from you, brothers, I also wanted to come here when I came in. Our four great clans have been friends for generations, and we're not the same as the 100 schools of Confucianism. Our clans have always benefited both sides if we cooperate. Today's situation does not allow us to hesitate. I suggest that the disciples of our four great clans cooperate and recommend Brother Dongfang to be our leader. What do you think? P.S. Fellow Taoists who like this book, please come to the starting point to vote. Vote for recommendation, bookmark, and reward. Thank you for all forms of support." Chapter 4508. This. Dongfang Yushan frowned slightly and declined. "I want the four families to merge into one, but it's better for the four of us to discuss the decision together." "Sigh, Brother Dongfang, why decline?" Beiming Qihan sighed. "Exploring the Star Moon Palace isn't a particularly important matter. Brother Dongfang doesn't need to take any responsibility. We just need to do our job well and not let the sect punish us. That's good too. Dongfang Yushan nodded and looked around. Our 4 families still don't have enough disciples. Why don't we wait for those families that are on good terms with us and enter together? Nangong Pingping and the others looked at each other, then looked at the disciples of their respective families and nodded. Because the opportunities in the Star Moon Palace were different from ordinary opportunities, it didn't care about the number of people. No matter how many people there were, those who had opportunities would naturally be able to comprehend the power of literature and break through the bottleneck to become a literature saint. No matter how few people there were, if they didn't have opportunities, they would gain nothing. Seeing that no one had any objections, Dongfang Yushan discussed with the others in a low voice and quietly allowed the other disciples to enter. During this time, there were more great beasts from the demon race who came in one after another. When these great beasts entered, they were all ecstatic. Then, they looked at the humans who were waiting inexplicably and moved their bodies to different places in the starry sky. Seeing that these great beasts flew in different directions, Dongfang Yushan and the others looked at each other and smiled with disdain. Because, like the Grand Mist ancestor, they were very clear that there were countless passages from the Star Moon Palace to the depths of the starry sky. However, until now, they only knew that the path to the meteor belt was the safest and had the least number of monsters. After the great beasts, the disciples of various families came in. Seeing the disciples of the 4 families waiting here, how could they not know why? Those who were related to the 4 families naturally came over, and those who weren't were also thinking of ways to get close or began to form an alliance according to the previous plan. Gongshu family, Murong family, Duanmu family, Huangfu family, Confucius family, and other families also began to gather around, ready to go. While the 4 aristocratic families were gathering their forces, Xiao Hua had already followed Shu Ji and Fairy Xingyue to the so-called meteor belt. According to Xiao Hua's thoughts, the so-called meteor belt should be similar to the falling rock formation he had seen before. There would be many meteors shuttling back and forth in this area. If one wanted to pass through, they only needed to avoid the meteors and be careful. However, when he flew through the starry sky and arrived in front of a huge space, he realized that he had been too naive. The Star Moon Palace was a place that even the 2 banished immortals feared, so how could it possibly have a simple rockfall matrix? In front of Xiao Hua was an extremely large space. This space was almost boundless and stretched across the starry sky in front of the 3 of them. There were a lot of spatial fragments in the space, and these fragments were constantly flying around recklessly. Xiao Hua looked at it. These fragments were either in the shape of a long strip, or in the shape of a square, or in the shape of an irregular hexagram. However, when Xiao Hua looked deeper into the space, there were even more fragments that didn't have any fixed shape. One moment, they would condense into a circle, and the next moment, they would condense into a sheet. The strangest thing was that there were lines that didn't have any shape flowing freely in the space. However, no matter the size or shape of the fragments, there was a layer of starlight flickering around these fragments. The starlight blocked Xiao Hua's vision, so he couldn't see what was under the starlight. Xiao Hua released his divine thought naturally, but as soon as his divine thought entered the space, it was immediately torn apart by several unknown forces. It was instantly torn apart, and an indescribable stabbing pain came from his Niwen Palace. The innate divine restriction outside his Niwen Palace actually couldn't stop this space from attacking his divine thought. When they were slightly closer, boom, boom, boom. Layers upon layers of ghostly wails and wolf howls came from the space. This sound of the wind was quite soul-stealing, causing Xiao Hua to feel a chill run down his spine. The strangest thing was that within the space, there was also the aura of a violent wind blowing against his face. Strands of ripples also rushed over along with the aura. Xiao Hua could easily distinguish that a portion of the aura and ripples were similar to the Thousand Demons' sacred realm, while a portion was similar to the ruins and the Primeval continent. Of course, there was still a portion that Xiao Hua did not know about. This. Xiao Hua was dumbfounded. He whispered to Fairy Xingyu, "Is this the meteor belt that Senior mentioned?" "Of course." Fairy Xingyu said proudly, "Can't you see that there is starlight on these fragments? Moreover, these fragments are flowing in this space like water. Shouldn't they be called a meteor belt?" All right. Xiao Hua said helplessly. I thought the so-called meteor belt was similar to the star array. What? Fairy Xingyu said with a smile. Do you think this name is inappropriate? It's not that it's inappropriate, Xiao Hua said with a bitter smile. I just think it's a little weird to call it a meteor belt. Then there's no other way. Fairy Xingyu said with a smile. I was the one who named the Star Moon Palace. Now, it's famous in the 3 continents. If you want to change it, I'm afraid it won't be easy. Senior, is there any danger in this meteor belt? Xiao Hua ignored Fairy Xingyu's show and looked at Shuji. Shuji looked at the chaotic space and pointed at the space fragments with his hand. He said, these space fragments are different. Some are earth fragments, some are ocean fragments, and some are pure void fragments. If they are void fragments, there will be voids in different realms. After the human clan enters, most of our bodies will be destroyed by the chi of heaven and earth. Even if they are earth fragments, ocean fragments, or mountain fragments, there will be some strange beasts on them. Some of these strange beasts are from the immortal world, some are from the Demon League, and there are many that we don't know. If the human clan cultivators encounter them, they will most likely die. Xiao Hua narrowed his eyes and looked at the fragments that had no rules. His heart was pounding. Shuji then pointed at the space between the fragments and said, then there are these spaces. Divine sense can't enter these spaces. Even if our divine sense were to enter, it would be torn apart, let alone your divine sense. The reason why there is such a strange phenomenon is because these space fragments belong to different realms. The auras of different realms collide with each other in the space, forming an extremely strange cutting force. You must have sensed the aura within. Some are similar to the 1,000 Demons Sacred Realm, some are similar to the Immortal Realm and the Demon League. Most of them are ancient, desolate auras. Those are the fragments left behind when the Star Moon Palace was refined in ancient times. There are shattered, desolate spaces on them. The chaotic intertwining of the auras of different realms will not only tear apart divine senses and extended thoughts, but also the bodies of the human clan. Therefore, we can't fly through this space for no reason. We can only find a gap in the chaotic aura and land in a safe space fragment. Then, we can cross this meteor belt step by step. Fairy Xingyu said with a smile, of course, what if we are lucky enough to encounter a transmission channel in one of the spaces without having to pass through all the space fragments? I'm not that lucky. Xiao Hua immediately said with a bitter face, whenever I have to find a way out, I've always taken the furthest path. It's a thankless task. Hee hee. Fairy Xingyu covered her mouth and giggled. I thought you said you would be the luckiest. Xiao Hua shrugged and asked Shuji in bewilderment, Senior, if I didn't have the Kunlun mirror, would the disciples of the star-picking tower and the cultivators chosen to sense the power of the stars and moon also have to pass through this meteor belt? Shuji naturally understood Xiao Hua's doubts and explained, when Fairy Xingyu and I first discovered the Star Moon Palace, we were the ones who entered. In addition to this meteor belt, we also went to many other places. Therefore, we have a good understanding of the Star Moon Palace and the way to enter it. Therefore, most of the disciples chosen by Fairy Xingyu in the star-picking tower should be able to pass through the previous starlight passage smoothly. Entering the Star Moon Palace is a kind of reward for them. As for what opportunities they will encounter, that is their own business. Therefore, generally speaking, after entering the Star Moon Palace, Fairy Xingyu will let them go their own way and find their own path. The cultivators chosen to help us search for the power of the stars and moon will naturally have to follow us. When passing through this meteor belt, half of them will have no problem. The other half will not be able to pass through. Fairy Xingyu and I will use our magical powers to bring them over. That's impossible. Xiao Hua looked at the space fragments floating in the sky like a mighty river and said in surprise, I don't even dare to say that I have full confidence in passing through this meteor belt. Senior, half of the cultivators you mentioned will be able to pass through? This time, we came at the wrong time. We might have come a little early or a little late. It's different from the previous times. Let's wait a little longer. It won't be long before the space vortex of this meteor belt stops. At that time, we will have a chance to pass through, Shuji said faintly. He sat cross-legged in front of the starry sky. The lightning mark between his eyebrows flickered and appeared. A very mysterious fluctuation emerged from Shuji's body and spread toward the vicinity of the meteor belt. When Fairy Xingyu saw this, she frowned and whispered, "Shuji, can your physical body withstand the expansion of thoughts?" "It doesn't matter," Shuji said softly, "I won't be using this physical body soon. There's no harm in trying. It's better to be careful." Fairy Xingyu said with concern, "It's not the final moment yet. If something unexpected happens." "Yes, I know." Shuji nodded. "I know what I'm doing." "That." Xiao Hua thought for a moment and whispered, "Senior, if you don't have to worry, leave this task to me. Don't use the methods of the immortal world." Chapter 4509. You. Shuji was a little skeptical and asked, "What other magical powers do you have?" This is the Star Moon Palace. Let me try first." Xiao Hua said with a smile. "If I can do it, you don't have to waste." Extend thought. The corners of Shuji's mouth curled into a faint smile as he said in a gratified manner, "All right, you can try first." As he spoke, Shuji withdrew his extend thought and looked at Xiao Hua kindly. Even Fairy Xingyu had a grateful smile in her eyes. Xiao Hua nodded slightly at the two immortals. He raised his hand and patted his forehead, opening his delusion breaker eye again. Seeing a green shadow flashing between Xiao Hua's eyebrows, Shuji and Fairy Xingyu looked at each other with a strange look in their eyes. Xiao Hua opened his eyes, and everything in front of him changed again. What starry sky, what meteor belt, they all disappeared. In front of him was an incomparably huge space, and the space was filled with countless fragments of different splendors. These fragments seemed like dust, and also like crushed stones, floating in the countless fine lines that seemed like flowing water. The fragments were similar to the space fragments that Xiao Hua had seen with his naked eye, but they were much smaller. As for whether each fragment was a continent or an ocean, Xiao Hua's delusion breaker eye could not tell. As for the fine lines, they flowed at an extremely fast speed and were entangled with each other. Some fine lines even rushed into the fragments and shattered them. Not only were the brilliance of these fine lines different, but their thickness was also different. Some were as thin as hair, and some were as thick as threads. However, hundreds of millions of fine lines enveloped the entire space. In front of Xiao Hua's eyes, there was a thin mist-like golden light that protected Xiao Hua and the others. There were some strange runes in the golden light. These runes were like fine lines of light, and within the fine lines of light, smaller runes were engraved. This golden light covered the sky and the earth, separating it from the fine lines like flowing water in an orderly manner. Even in the distance of the meteor belt, it looked like the runes were also paved with golden light. Xiao Hua looked around. The fine lines of the flowing water seemed to have no source and no end. On his left and right, two dim silvery white human-shaped lights flashed slightly. Xiao Hua naturally knew that this silver-white humanoid brilliance was Shuji and Fairy Xingyu. Therefore, he only glanced at them from the corner of his eye. He did not dare to look at them for too long. Then, he focused his delirium dharma eye on the fine lines of the water flow. After looking at it carefully for a moment, Xiao Hua had an idea in his heart. Just as Shuji said, the fine lines were slowly slowing down. Moreover, the collisions between the different colored fine lines were starting to lessen. Xiao Hua could even see a slightly chaotic order in the fine lines before his eyes. Seeing the delusion breaker Dharma eye on Xiao Hua's forehead disappear, Shuji asked with some concern, "How is it? Your divine art didn't suffer any backlash from the meteor belt, right?" Xiao Hua's heart warmed slightly. This kind of adventure was a true adventure. There was no need to worry about being tricked by others. If there was some danger, others would even block it for you. Xiao Hua smiled and said, "Senior, you should know that this divine ability of mine usually won't backfire." "Well, what did you see?" Unlike Shuji, Fairy Xingyu urged, "Can you see the passage they flew through?" Xiao Hua shook his head and said, "There is no passage in this meteor belt. We can only rush through it slowly like what you said just now." "Oh." Fairy Xingyu responded with some disappointment. However, I saw that these different auras are slowing down. Moreover, there is a certain order between the auras, Xiao Hua said again. A strange look flashed across Shuji's eyes as he whispered, "Your divine art. Is it the Buddha's heavenly eye?" "Well, it's somewhat similar." Xiao Hua didn't hide it and replied, "However, there is also a big difference. My Dharma eye is much more powerful than heavenly eye." "You're just bluffing." Fairy Xing Yu didn't believe him. "Also," Xiao Hua pointed to the two sides and asked, "Is there no other place that is easy to pass through?" "Actually, there are other pavilions in this meteor belt that we can go to," Shuji explained. "However, those pavilions require some strange tokens. Fairy Xing Yu and I didn't find any, so we can't enter those pavilions. On the other side of this meteor belt, there are some places that don't require tokens. In particular, there is one place that might be the passage, so we have to go through there. When Shuji and I first came here, we spent most of our time in this meteor belt, so we know the situation on the other side of this meteor belt the best." Fairy Xingyue added, "This meteor belt is almost endless. Even with our ability, we can't find the end of it. In the nearby hundreds of thousands of miles, only this place has a relatively weak aura. There are also times when it has a lull. The other places are like rivers, and the auras of the various realms are like waves, never calming down. We can't pass through at all. Senior, you must have tried other methods." Xiao Hua probed. "Were they all ineffective?" "Yes." Shuji nodded. "After finding a pavilion with a strong immortal spiritual aura, we were a little impatient when we entered. When we passed through this meteor belt, we tried to use the flowing cloud bridge of the immortal realm. Not only did it not bring us to the other side of the meteor belt, but it also almost destroyed my physical body at that time. Senior, can you protect me?" Xiao Hua pondered for a moment and asked, "What do you want to do?" Shuji frowned. "Since we're here, don't fail at the last step. Why don't you wait for a while? Junior will try." Xiao Hua smiled. "If it works, not only will Senior have more confidence, but Junior will also have more means to protect my life in this Star Moon Palace. It's better not to try." Shuji's concern was like facing his own junior. He said, "Fairy Xing Yu and I didn't tell you the details of the Star Moon Palace because we were afraid that you would have your own ideas and inevitably use your own methods. You just need to follow behind us and contribute when it's time. Junior will try." Xiao Hua still refused to give up. "If there's anything unusual about this meteor belt, Senior only needs to block the backlash of the meteor belt. Presumably, Senior already has some experience, right?" Shuji was a little unhappy. He glanced at Xiao Hua and said, "Have you really decided?" "Yes. Junior wants to try." Xiao Hua nodded affirmatively. "Well, you can cast the spell." Shuji agreed. "If there's anything unusual, I'll block the backlash for you. However, the backlash of this meteor belt is very strange. I'm not sure if I can block it. You have to be careful too." "Okay." Xiao Hua responded. His eyes narrowed slightly, and the soul silk between his eyebrows rushed out. In an instant, a ghostly chanting sound came from the soul silk. One by one, green seal characters flew out from between his eyebrows and quickly separated and combined in mid-air. "Shaman." Fairy Xingyue opened her mouth, her eyes filled with horror. Shuji's expression also changed drastically. Before Shuji could stop Xiao Hua, he saw the green seal text land in the sky of the meteor belt. A tumbling teleportation channel slowly appeared, and within the teleportation channel, the green seal text swarmed towards the opposite side of the meteor belt. However, just as this technique passed through the golden light that Xiao Hua's delusion breaker eye could see, the runes in the golden light immediately transformed into a long spear that was several feet long. It let out a sharp whistle and crazily rushed into the green seal text. "Pa!" With a loud sound, the green seal text of the word transmit completely collapsed. The transmission channel that had just been formed also collapsed from the inside out. When the transmission channel turned into hundreds of small green seal characters, more golden runes once again turned into thumb-sized spears and pierced into the smaller green seal characters. "Pa pa pa." More rumbling sounds were heard until all the green seal characters were destroyed. Not only that, when the green seal characters disappeared, the golden light condensed into a spear several feet long and pierced toward Xiao Hua's eyebrows like lightning and thunder. Get out of the way! Although Shuji couldn't see the spear condensed from the golden light, he could feel the recoil of the meteor belt. Seeing that the attack was even more powerful than the one he had encountered before, Shuji shouted loudly, and his figure was about to block in front of Xiao Hua. No need. Xiao Hua felt a strong wind coming from between his eyebrows. Even his delusion breaker eye seemed to be blown apart by this strong wind. Xiao Hua hurriedly shouted, "We'll just use the thunder technique to block this attack." As he spoke, lightning surged around Xiao Hua's body. 4-colored lightning shot out from his hand and pounced on the spear-shaped runes. Okay. Shuji didn't dare to be careless. His hands formed seals, and 2 water-blue lightning passed through the space and merged with Xiao Hua's 4-colored lightning. Bang! With a loud bang, the 5-colored lightning was smashed into powder. The spear condensed by the golden runes didn't collapse, but its sharpness was already reduced by 60%. Xiao Hua's figure flashed, and in an instant, the spear didn't even touch his shadow. Bang! Not far behind Xiao Hua, the starry sky was destroyed by the invisible spear, and a huge black hole appeared. A strong suction force came from the black hole, sucking in the nearby fluctuations and aura. Xiao Hua and the others were slightly shocked. They each used their magical powers to teleport away, avoiding the suction force of the black hole. After a few minutes, the black hole slowly disappeared, and Xiao Hua flew back. How was it? Shuji asked. Have you given up? Yes, I know. Xiao Hua nodded. He had really given up. It seemed that the soul cultivation technique, which had always been successful, had lost its former power in the Star Moon Palace built in ancient times. Fairy Xingyu said with a smile, Shuji, Xiao Hua is doing this out of kindness. He just wants to save us some trouble. He's just trying to be brave and competitive. Xiao Hua smiled faintly and didn't admit it. Shuji glanced at Xiao Hua with a cold expression. He then looked at Fairy Xingyu and said, I haven't been a judge for many years. I'm no longer as cold-blooded as before. Furthermore, I was once an ordinary mortal. Naturally, I can see these things as well. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.